Chapter 595. In the Glaze ancient pagoda, the primitive emperor and the others surged with spiritual light and blasted toward the void above their heads. Suddenly, the entire ancient pagoda violently tumbled, as if it couldn't withstand the might of the emperors. A space crack gradually appeared in the sky. A dazzling light sprinkled from it and shone on Partridge Lee's face, causing his body to tremble for no reason. This is the temperature, this is the aura. This is the taste of freedom. Suddenly, Partridge Lee's eyes flashed with a hint of ferocity. Today, when I leave the pagoda, it will be the time for the dragon to return to the deep sea. From now on, I am the master of heaven and earth. Wind and clouds gather and disperse at my command. Ling Xiao, Ren Yueying, I will make sure you die without a burial place. My lord, stop trembling. If you delay any longer, you won't be able to get out. The primitive emperor's eyes flashed with a wisp of soul light, and the corner of his mouth raised into a sneer. The game has been set, and everyone has entered the trap. Next, it was time for the game. However, today, whether it was the black taking the white or the white taking the black, it had nothing to do with Ling Xiao, the chess player. Because, from the beginning to the end, this game was just his own entertainment. All living beings die, only I live. Let's go. Partridge Lee gritted his teeth and turned into a stream of light, rushing out of the pagoda. A sneer appeared on the primitive emperor's face. My lord, it seems that you really yearn for freedom. On the immortal mountain, Ren Yueying and the rest of the Han Palace powerhouses stared at the violently trembling ancient pagoda, and the next moment, their eyes suddenly narrowed. Endless demonic chi began to surge, and in a short moment, it turned into a dark cloud, shrouding the entire mountain peak. F***CK? What's going on? Everyone looked at Ling Xiao, only to see that at this time, the latter's eyes also had a touch of bitterness and despair, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Not good, the young master is afraid that he can't hold on. Everyone, the demons are breaking out of the pagoda. I'm afraid I can't suppress them. Prepare to fight to the death. Ling Xiao roared in despair, and the spiritual light around him shone brightly, and the originally withered aura seemed to be rejuvenated. What? Ren Yueying's expression, and a chill spread in her heart. What happened to the banquet? Why does it feel like I'm going to be? Boom! In the end, the glazed ancient pagoda turned into a stream of light and disappeared into Ling Xiao's soul sea. Suddenly, several demonic figures appeared in the sky and gradually revealed their true forms. Buzz! Spiritual light whistled around the elders of the celestial palace, evolving into Saint Might. At this point, they seemed to have no other choice. Although Lord Ling Xiao's actions seemed to have helped the demons a great deal. But this wasn't young master's fault. In everyone's eyes, the fact that he risked his life to seal the great demon was already a righteous act. Now that his aura was weak and he had been taken advantage of by the demon, what else could he say? If they continued to blame them, it would only prove that they were cowards. Ha 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 ha. We're finally out. Partridge Gully stood in the void with an excited expression. In the next moment, his expression froze. Beside him, Yuan Emperor and the others stood with their hands behind their back. They were surrounded by a deathly aura that formed a sea. It was as if there were tens of thousands of ghosts howling in unison, eerie and evil. Moreover, most importantly, Partridge Gully seemed to have discovered that there were two more people behind Yuan Emperor. One of them was a terrifying demonic figure that was several feet tall. He was covered in black armor, and his face was majestic and ferocious. However, there seemed to be no vitality on his body. Only that pair of scarlet eyes flickered with soul light. Monstrous demonic aura whistled around his body. Numerous bizarre demonic patterns manifested in the air, transforming into boundless phenomena. He just stood there, but he gave people a feeling of indestructible heaven and earth. The other person was covered in a black robe. He had a slender figure, but the demonic aura emitted from his body could be described as terrifying. There was a faint salty aura. Great demon! Great demon! These were two great demons! At this time, everyone on the cold moon celestial mountain looked at the two terrifying demonic figures and swallowed their saliva. In the blink of an eye, Ren Yueying understood. This was the ancient demon that was released by Xia Feng from the immortal world that young master mentioned. The one beside him should be the fierce demon that caused trouble in the western border. No! It should be a sea demon. That moist and salty smell was too obvious. I know! This was the smell of the sea. These two people were, of course, Xiong Huan and Layered Shadow that Ling Xiao had arranged in the Glaze ancient pagoda. Ren Yueying was, after all, fighting on her home ground. With the primitive emperor and Partridge Gully's current strength, they might not be able to kill them all. So, Lord Divine Envoy, I will help you. Hiss! Partridge Gully's soul light instantly surged. He frowned as he looked at the calm primitive emperor and the others. At first, he thought that these two demons were Ling Zhao's accomplices. But something was not right? Why did the primitive emperor and the others not seem to be surprised at all? 5 people went in and 7 came out. He was not surprised or confused. Xia Feng, Yuan Gexing, you actually joined hands with the sea race and slaughtered my western border. Today, even if I die, I will use the power of the immortal palace to kill you all. Just as Partridge Gully was muttering to himself, Ren Yueying suddenly shouted. The entire cold moon immortal mountain suddenly erupted with countless tyrannical auras. All the elders and disciples of the cold palace held their spirit treasures and waited solemnly, as if they were ready to fight the demons. Join hands with the sea race? Thump! Partridge Gully's mouth slightly opened as he turned to look at the primitive emperor and the two demons. Especially the gloomy aura that swept over their bodies, it was filled with a heart-palpitating evil intent. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed like he was on the same side as the demons. On the contrary, Ren Yueying, Ling Xiao and the others were covered in golden light, their righteous aura soaring to the sky. It seemed like they were the righteous side? On the mountain peak, there were western border citizens and cultivators crowded in front of the palace, looking down the mountain. At this moment, their faces revealed a trace of resentment. In just a day, hundreds of thousands of vagrant cultivators had gathered on the immortal mountain. In their hearts, the cold palace's Ren Yueying and the blood-soaked Lord Ling Xiao were their last hope. Ren Yueying, don't talk nonsense. I am the 4th divine envoy of the sacred sect, Partridge Gully. You colluded with the true demon and fooled the world. If I don't kill you today, it will be difficult to resolve the hatred in my heart. To be honest, Partridge Gully's heart was also somewhat hesitant. He felt that the primitive emperor and the others did not seem to be good people. But no matter what kind of demons they were, compared to the sky demon Ling Xiao, they were nothing to be afraid of. After all, these two forces were like fire and water, let them fight to the death. Today, as long as he killed Ling Xiao, it would be a great merit. 4th divine envoy? Ren Yueying sneered and turned to look at Ling Xiao. Her eyes were filled with ridicule. You don't say. Your voice is quite good. If not for the young master seeing through your scheme, if he gave you a divine order, I might have really believed it. You are about to die and still dare to talk nonsense. If you are the 4th divine envoy, I will stand upside down and eat shit. All elders of the immortal palace, attack together with me. In the end, Ren Yueying did not speak any more nonsense and waved her lily-white hand. A spiritual light palm print instantly condensed into heaven and earth and fell on Partridge Gully's head. Chapter 596. Huh! Ren Yueying, you're courting death. Partridge Gully narrowed his eyes and sneered in his heart. Why are you in such a hurry? Ren Yueying, are you afraid that I'll expose your lies and make you intolerable to the world? Good. Ren Yueying, you betrayed our holy sect. Today, I, as the 4th divine envoy, sentence your cold moon celestial palace to be exterminated. Partridge Gully roared and pressed his palm down. Monstrous golden light began to bloom, but it was mixed with a trace of demonic intent. It was densely covered with Tao runes, revealing supreme majesty. However, at this moment, curses were heard from the forest. Bah! Shameless! You're obviously a demon, but you dare to impersonate a divine envoy. If the holy sect has a divine envoy like you, it doesn't matter if we don't believe it in the future. Yes, true demon Xia Feng is impersonating a divine envoy. Palace Master, please kill this demon for the world. Kill him! Partridge Gully's body trembled, and blood almost spurted out from his throat. The world is stupid, the world is stupid! Boom! The two spiritual palms collided in the void, and countless rays of light bloomed in the world. Countless cracks appeared on the mountain under Ren Yuang's feet, and her figure was pushed back several meters before she could stabilize herself. What a terrifying battle strength! The expressions of the cold palace elders changed, but there was not much fear in their eyes. After all, this was the cold moon celestial mountain, and the array above their heads could contend against an 8th stage divine emperor. Although these demons are top-notch experts, the immortal palace has a lot of people. What are you waiting for? Kill! Ren Yuang gritted her teeth and shouted softly. Beside her, Great Elder Tan Jingshui rushed out and pounced on Primitive Emperor. My lord and I will work together to deal with Ren Yuang and Tan Jingshui. The rest of you, quickly kill the cold palace elders. Primitive Emperor looked at Ling Xiao deeply and said, As for that Ling Xiao, humph, the sea race friend, how about I leave him to you? No problem. Our Sea Emperor has instructed us to listen to Primitive Emperor's orders in the western border. Folded Shadow smiled and spread out his demonic aura, which turned into waves and swept toward Ling Xiao. Primitive Emperor! What's going on? Who is that person from the sea race? Partridge Gully turned his head and looked at Primitive Emperor with a puzzled expression. The latter only shook his head and smiled. Sir, don't worry. It's just a friend I invited to help me kill Ren Yuang. Then, Partridge Gully's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Xiong Huan with a hint of fear. To be honest, whether it was the Primitive Emperor or the Sea Demon, he didn't really put them in his eyes. Only this fiendish demon who hadn't said a word from beginning to end made him feel a chill all over his body. The devilish will on his body seemed to be able to split the heavens and earth apart, and create a profound universe. This demon's origin was probably not simple. This is a friend of a friend from the sea race. He is also here to help. Milord, if you hesitate any longer, I'm afraid we'll all be buried here today. The Primitive Emperor said indifferently. He turned into a rainbow light and went straight for Tan Jingshui. In the end, Partridge Gully didn't think too much about it. He took a deep breath and spiritual wheels began to flicker around his body. No matter what, the news of the western border would soon reach the Divine Lord's ears. At that time, everything would be decided by the Divine Master. Ren Yuang, we haven't seen each other for many years. Let this divine envoy see how much progress you have made. Partridge Gully stretched out his palm, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to roar around his body. In an instant, 2 dazzling rings appeared in the sky like the scorching sun. Vast divine power surged out, and the runes on it overflowed. It was indescribably magical and terrifying. Then, Partridge Gully's palm pressed down, and 2 bright suns fell from the sky toward Ren Yuang's head. The entire space collapsed in an instant, and the sound of the great Tao resounded in everyone's ears. Ren Yuang frowned slightly, and the divine clouds surged around her. A golden cauldron condensed out of thin air, emitting an indestructible aura, and fiercely collided with the spiritual wheels. Clang! The sound of a huge bell crashing into each other resounded loudly. The spiritual waves visible to the naked eye swept across the entire immortal mountain. Countless disciples of the cold palace instantly vomited blood and flew backward. Even on the mountain peak, there were commoners bleeding from their 7 orifices and fell to the ground dead. What a ruthless demon! He even killed unarmed commoners. Everyone, be careful. Ling Xiao stepped out and stood on the mountain path. The spiritual light around his body lit up, blocking the endless spiritual waves. At this time, his face was getting paler and paler, especially his blood-stained white robe, which added a bit of poignant beauty. Under the impact of the spiritual waves, Ling Xiao's figure kept retreating. Every time he retreated, he would spit out a mouthful of blood. The entire mountain path was gradually dyed red with blood. At this time, the firm and upright figure was like an obsession, deeply engraved in the hearts of everyone. Lord Ling Xiao. Seeing this scene, countless people had tears in their eyes, and their hearts were surging. This is the backbone of our western border. What holy sect, what divine envoy, where were you when the demon appeared? Who can stop the demon's advance? Only I, Lord Ling Xiao. Pucci. This time, Partridge Gully, who was far away in the sky, finally could not suppress the resentment in his heart, and a trace of blood flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Too sullen. This feeling is too sullen. He was the divine envoy of the holy sect, the embodiment of justice, but now, he was framed by the true demon and was reviled by the world. But he, the reincarnation of the sky demon, pretended to be noble and righteous, and he was willing to sacrifice himself for justice. Shameless. Despicable. He's not human. Oh, he's not human in the first place. Damn. Boom. A huge wave swept across the sky, emitting an endless bloody aura. The overlapping figure appeared above Ling Xiao's head, and a wave was formed under the jade hand seal. Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly, and he unsheathed the evil sea sword in his hand and slashed down. The sword intent filled the sky, and a soft sound spread like the wind. It became loud and clear until it was ear-piercing. Clang! The sword intent was like a dragon, piercing the clouds and shattering the sky, and fell toward the wave. Then, everyone was dumbfounded as they watched the monstrous wave suddenly split into two, turning into spiritual light that fell from the sky. Hiss! On the mountain peak, everyone sucked in a cold breath. Is this the young master's true strength? There's nothing to say. Young master. Awesome. Boom. Boom. In the sky, the sound of spiritual power colliding could be heard. Spirit treasures flashing with multicolored light floated in the sky and smashed toward Partridge Gully. The sky shattered, and the immortal mountain trembled. Even with the strength of this divine envoy, he was still a little flustered at this time, unable to cope with the situation. There was no other way. There were dozens of elders of the Cold Palace, and he was facing them alone. Why aren't you attacking? Partridge Gully turned his head and looked at the god-emperors of the Yuan dynasty, and shouted coldly. At this point, he could not care about anything else. If he really died here today, then the truth would definitely be covered up. He could not die. Boom. Xiong Huan took a step forward, and a demonic shadow appeared behind him, standing tall in the sky. Endless demonic light erupted like a volcano, and in an instant, the sky suddenly darkened. Chapter 597. When did such a great demon appear in the Xingzhou? Looking at the tall demonic figure that appeared in front of the elders, Partridge Gully's eyes narrowed. He could feel that the demonic intent on the demonic body was monstrous. As he breathed, the space trembled faintly. But why didn't the sacred sect know about such a powerful demon? Partridge Gully inexplicably felt that the Xingzhou was about to descend into chaos. Above the void, spiritual light spread for thousands of miles, destroying the demonic splendor. However, with Xiong Huan's strength, ordinary god-emperors were no match for him. In front of him, two elders of the Celestial Palace were struggling. But with their strength, even after using all their trump cards, they couldn't break through the demon's defense. The demonic bear battle physique was known for its defense. Even if Xiong Huan's spiritual power was gone, his demonic intent and physical body alone were not something these ants could contend against. For someone who stood high above the 9 heavens to fall in a single night, it was extraordinary. With the addition of Xiong Huan, the Cold Moon Palace people, who had the upper hand, were soon sent flying while vomiting blood and screaming, "Elders! Fight to the death!" Seeing this scene, Ren Yuying's eyes were filled with rage as she roared towards the sky. Dao runes began to appear on her jade-like hand, and the golden cauldron instantly expanded to 100 feet in size, suppressing Partridge Gully. At the same time, a Dao artifact appeared in Tan Jingshui's hand. It was a red silk that turned into an immortal mist and wrapped around Yuan Emperor. The power of the all-out attack of more than 10 god emperors was imaginable. Above the cold moon's celestial mountain, spatial turbulence was rampant, and pieces of ice crystals were shattered. Within 100 miles there was no spiritual energy, and the forest collapsed. It was as if doomsday had arrived. The sacred sect had ruled the Xingzhou for thousands of years. Although the western border was chaotic all year round, such a large-scale battle had never happened. However, the Dao artifacts kept colliding, and just the aftershocks were enough to kill countless living beings. This was destined to be an endless battle between the righteous and demonic sides. However, under Ling Zhao's arrangements, the original righteous and demonic sides had been completely reversed. Time passed slowly. Above the celestial mountain, blood qi filled the air, and demonic light whistled. Although Cold Moon Immortal Palace had many people, Partridge Gully, Primitive Emperor and Xiong Huan all had the terrifying battle strength of a 7th-stage God Emperor. Furthermore, as the ghostly radiance outside the Primitive Emperor's body whistled, the fallen elders of the Cold Palace slowly got up from the ground, turned around and rushed towards their fellow disciples. Evil ghost arts, one could see how savage it was. Pucci. In Xiong Huan's hands, the 2 elders of the Cold Palace were unable to withstand the demonic might that was like a sea, and were crushed into minced meat. Xia Feng, even if I have to risk the destruction of the Immortal Palace, I will kill you. Ren Yuang gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing with determination. Then, she took a step forward, and her figure instantly appeared under the void array. At this moment, spiritual light rippled from her body and turned into an ancient crescent moon seal that entered the formation. In the next moment, there seemed to be a divine shadow descending from the formation, overlooking the world. An indescribable chill rose from the bottom of everyone's heart. The patterns of the great Tao transformed into moonlight, pouring down from the sky. Layer upon layer, they interweaved into a seal. Then, the divine shadow stretched out his hand, grabbed the spiritual seal, and softly chanted an incantation. Above the firmament, silver light shone brightly. Vaguely, a crescent moon appeared in the middle of the formation, covering the horizon. Xia Feng, today, I will destroy you on behalf of the Cold Moon Palace. Outside Ren Yuang's body, spiritual light rushed into the sky and entered the ancient formation. This formation was left behind by the ancestor of the Cold Moon Palace. Outside, it could protect the immortal mountain, and inside, it could suppress and kill evil spirit. However, to activate the formation, one must use an extremely large amount of spiritual energy as a guide. If it was in the past, Ren Yuang would not dare to put all her eggs in one basket. But now, looking at the elders of the Immortal Palace who were cruelly killed by Xiong Huan, the Primitive Emperor, and the others, Ren Yuang had no way out. If she was defeated today, she would lose her life and reputation. Even if she had to gamble with her spiritual energy, she had to try her best. Vast divine might began to surge, and an unparalleled momentum that could suppress and kill all living things descended from the sky. On the spiritual moon, divine runes appeared, and there seemed to be an immortal descending from the moon. Carrying the momentum of destroying eternity, it pressed down on Partridge Li's head. Ren Yuang, do you think you can kill me? Partridge Li shouted coldly, and a torrential momentum accumulated on his body. A golden blazing sun appeared in the sky, illuminating the firmament and surging with holy intent. Go! The spiritual moon and the golden sun rose and fell, crushing the entire immortal mountain into pieces. The void within thousands of miles cracked, as if it could not withstand such divine might. Even Ling Xiao and the others hurriedly circulated their spiritual energy to protect their bodies and rushed into the distant sky. Boom! An indescribable power rippled out like the end of an era. Wherever the spiritual might passed, all living things perished, and no vitality remained. The glaring light illuminated the entire world like it was scorching white. The spiritual formation that originally enveloped the immortal mountain finally shattered at this moment. Crack! Hearing the sound, the eyes of all the disciples of the cold palace suddenly narrowed. However, the radiance of the blazing sun and the spiritual moon was too bright, and they could not see the scene inside clearly. Only Ling Xiao stood on the mountain peak with his hands behind his back, and his eyes remained calm. Sure enough, even if her physical body was shattered and her cultivation level fell, the strength of the sacred sect's divine envoy was still extremely terrifying. If Ren Yueying did not rely on this ancient formation, she would have definitely died under this attack. Even so, she was not far from death at this moment. Suddenly, the sound of someone vomiting blood came from above the void. Only then did everyone see a white-robed figure fall from the sky. His aura was weak, and he only had one last breath of life left. Under the joint attack of Xiong Huan and the primitive emperor, the cold palace's great elder's physical body was shattered, and his divine soul was destroyed. Humph! Ren Yueying, do you really think that with just you and an immature true demon, you can contend against me? I am still invincible in the western border. Wait until I capture your divine soul and see how I torture you. Just as Partridge Li's voice rang out, a black shadow swept over from the void and grabbed the Cold Moon Palace master in his hand. Stop! Partridge Li's eyes narrowed. Just now, he had enough time to kill Ren Yueying. The reason why he did not kill her was that he wanted to capture her and search her soul to find out how she had joined the Sky Demon. However, before he could stop him, the demonic shadow clenched his fist and crushed Ren Yueying instantly. What a joke! How could Ling Xiao not think of something that he could think of? The experts of the sacred sect must be on the way, so he would not leave any threat behind. Today, no one on this immortal mountain could survive. You! Partridge Li's face darkened, and his eyes flashed with killing intent. Damn it! This evil demon had actually ruined his grand plan. Are you teaching me how to do things? Xiong Huan turned around and looked at Partridge Li coldly. The latter only felt a chill go straight to the top of his head, and a trace of uneasiness flashed in his eyes. Originally, he was quite wary of this great devil. That seal just now had exhausted all of his spiritual energy. If this great demon attacked him, he would not be able to defeat him. Bear with it. Be steady. Wait a minute. Boom! However, since Partridge Li was avoiding the battle, Ling Xiao would not give him a chance. Xiong Huan stepped forward, and the momentum around him rose steadily. Every step he took was like a loud thunder that shook people's hearts. You were still hiding your strength. At this moment, Partridge Li's heart trembled. Chapter 598. Boom! Boom! The Sky Demon intent overflowed from Xiong Huan's body. The demonic aura carried a domineering aura that could destroy heaven and earth. With a single step, the void shattered. Xiong Huan's figure finally appeared in front of Partridge Li. I didn't teach you to do anything. I just wanted to spare her life. Partridge Li no longer had the majesty of a divine envoy. With this great demon's strength, he might not be able to suppress Xiong Huan even at his peak. Today, Xiong Huan couldn't die. Otherwise, the saint would fall into a passive position. Damn it! He knew that these demons did whatever they wanted and didn't need a reason to kill. It was completely based on their mood. Why did he have to do something unnecessary and provoke them for no reason? For the first time in his life, Partridge-Lee was in awe of demons. Die. However, Xiong Huan killed him under Ling Zhao's orders. Behind him, 100-meter-tall demonic figure appeared. There seemed to be a demonic roar that shook the heavens and the earth, as if a peerless monster was about to break out of the ground. Then, under the dumbfounded gazes of all the Shijiang people, Xiong Huan punched out. The void instantly distorted and collapsed. The demonic aura was vast and mighty, as if there were thousands of demons roaring in the world. Many disciples with weaker cultivations only felt the aura around their bodies tremble and boil. They were actually shaken to death by the might of this punch, bleeding from their 7 apertures. No! Partridge-Lee's eyes were filled with despair. Now that he had seized Xia Feng's body, the strength of this body wasn't enough to support him to use his strongest trump card. Moreover, Xiong Huan's timing was perfect. He had just used up all of his spiritual energy to fight Ren Yueying and couldn't recover in a short period of time. Facing this heaven-shattering punch, Partridge-Lee's eyes were filled with resentment and anger. Yuan Emperor, save me. My lord, you're already invincible. Why do you need others to save you? Yuan Emperor stood with his hands behind his back with a mocking expression. The resentment on Partridge-Lee's face was completely frozen before it dissipated. At this moment, he seemed to see a faint smile on the lips of the youth on the mountain peak. Suddenly, Partridge-Lee's body trembled uncontrollably as if he was electrocuted. Conspiracy. Even though he had his doubts before, Partridge-Gully still didn't think that Ling Xiao had the strength to kill him. He also did not think that there was anyone in the western border who could threaten him other than the incarnation of Lord Taixin. However, he never expected that Xiong Huan had actually concealed his strength. Moreover, he chose to attack him at such an opportune moment. In an instant, Partridge-Lee understood many things. Why did he coincidentally possess a young devil's body? Why would Yuan Emperor and the others appear in the ancient pagoda at the right time? And why would there be 2 more devils on the frigid moon celestial mountain? This was a conspiracy. This was a conspiracy. Of course, until now, Partridge-Gully would never have imagined that a mere 17-year-old youth would be able to command several god emperors. What was even more unexpected was that he would be so scheming. Step by step, it was as if he had fallen into the trap that Ling Xiao had prepared for him a long time ago. In that case, that Ren Yueying might really not know that Ling Xiao was a devil. Xia Feng. This name sounded familiar. Wait. Was he the prince of the Xia dynasty, the rumored true devil youth? Hiss, at this moment, even with Partridge-Lee's temperament, he felt an inexplicable chill. Ling Xiao had actually planned this for such a long time? It could be said to be flawless. Everyone who appeared had their fates firmly controlled by him, playing the role he wanted them to play. What did this have to do with lowering one's intelligence? Like a net, one was powerless to struggle. The more one struggled, the tighter it would become. It turned out that long before the Saints sect had discovered the reincarnation of the Sky Demon, he had already deliberately set up his chess pieces to destroy the Saints sect's strength. However, in this case, Partridge-Lee's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of panic. If he died, no one in the entire western border would know Ling Zhao's true identity. In fact, looking at the admiration in the eyes of the people of the western border for Ling Xiao, Partridge-Lee felt a deep sense of powerlessness. Toying with the people in the palm of his hand, but the people respected him like an immortal. What a terrifying temperament, what a terrifying strategy! The Saints sect was in danger. No! I can't die! Soul light suddenly rippled around Partridge-Lee, turning into a divine rainbow that enveloped his entire body. At this critical moment, the Saints sect's divine envoy finally remembered his mission. He could die, but he must let the Divine Master know that the Sky Demon had returned. The endless void began to ripple, and the light in front of Partridge Lee was completely distorted. He took the initiative to burn his divine soul, forming a seal with his 8th grade Emperor soul, and attacked Xiong Huan. The power of this seal was extremely terrifying. The blue sky was densely covered with cracks. However, at this time, Xiong Huan's eyes did not waver. With a force that could crush the heavens, he fiercely punched the soul seal. Clang! Partridge Lee screamed, and half of his body instantly shattered. Blood sprinkled from the sky, and there was a trace of despair in his eyes. However, just as his divine soul left his body and was about to escape, the void in front of him suddenly trembled. A young man's figure emerged and stood in front of him. The gentle smile at the corner of his mouth was clearly mixed with supreme demonic intent. There were only a few people in the Xingzhou land who were proficient in divine soul attack. This was the reason why Partridge Lee wanted to possess a body. Now that he had burned his divine soul, he was already extremely weak. He wanted to escape, but he saw that the young man's eyes suddenly lit up with bright red light. No, an irresistible devouring force swept over, enveloping Partridge Lee's divine soul and crushing it. At the same time, a jumbled memory suddenly appeared in Ling Zhao's soul sea. He just calmly swung his sword, and Xia Feng's body was decapitated. Good! Young master is mighty! The entire Cold Moon Celestial Mountain was instantly filled with thunderous applause. All the western border cultivators and citizens looked at the figure that fell from the sky with joy and excitement. Although the timing of Ling Zhao's killing was more or less a little sinister and despicable. But could this be called despicable? Young master took advantage of the internal strife between the two demons to kill them. This was called heroic and wise. Moreover, would being merciful to demons have a good ending? Look at Princess Yao Yao. Wasn't this painful enough? Since there was an 80% chance that none of them would survive today, it was worth it to kill a demon. Die. In the sky, Xiong Huan's expression was calm as he threw a seemingly fierce punch. Ling Xiao cooperated and flew back. Before he landed, blood splattered everywhere. Lord Ling Xiao. Seeing this scene, countless people's eyes were instantly filled with tears. The fear of death disappeared inexplicably. Being able to die on the same day as a contemporary hero like Lord Ling Xiao was probably the most memorable thing in their sloppy lives. Even if their descendants were to brag to others in the future, they would have one more thing to brag about. My ancestor died on the same day as Lord Ling Xiao and was buried in the same place. Chapter 599. Plop! Ling Zhao's figure fell to the ground and didn't get up for a long time. Xiong Huan snorted coldly and looked at the primitive emperor. Your people dared to provoke me. I won't kill you today because of your friendship with the Sea clan. If there's a next time, I will exterminate your entire clan. With that, Xiong Huan's figure instantly disappeared. The overlapping shadow in front of the ancient forest also raised the corner of his mouth into a smile. Primitive Emperor, it's done. I will return to southern border with my lord. You can settle the rest yourself. Thank you, my friend from the Sea clan. Say hello to the Ocean Emperor for me. The primitive emperor nodded with a smile, but there was an inexplicable sadness in his eyes. Acting, of course, had to be done in full. After all, there were still many spectators on Mount Han. These people would become witnesses of this battle in the future. But the famous actors had run away. What would happen to the rest of the extras? F***CK. What else could happen to them? I've let you guys finish your act, and you guys can just leave. Leaving me and my friends from the Yuan dynasty to be killed by the saint. At this time, the primitive emperor had already guessed the direction of the plot. Ling Xiao would definitely step forward to protect the cultivators and people of southern border on the mountain. Until the powerhouses of the saint arrived and killed the primitive emperor and others. In this way, Ling Zhao's holy name would spread throughout the Xingzhou in a few days. And as the savior of western border, Even if the saint had doubts, they wouldn't dare to act rashly against Ling Xiao. After all, the saint was still the leader of Xingzhou's righteous path. What the divine master cared about was the praise and faith of the world. Killing Ling Xiao, who saved the world, would definitely cause them to lose public opinion. Water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it. It was an eternal law. Moreover, the saint never sent any powerhouses to descend into the world during the crisis of Western Border. How would they dare to risk universal condemnation and make things difficult for the little hero who saved the world, Ling Xiao? But all of this had nothing to do with the primitive emperor. At the border of Western Border, a golden-robed figure stood with her hands behind her back. Her eyes, the only one exposed outside the immortal clouds, flashed with a touch of graveness. She looked down at the golden token in her hand. The fourth divine envoy is dead. What? Behind him, the eyes of the two other golden-robed old men narrowed, and they were filled with disbelief. The divine emissary was an 8th-rank great emperor. Who in the Western Border could kill him? Previously, our saint's spies in the Western Border sent a message saying that the Deyuan emperor had joined forces with the demons and the sea race to overthrow the saint's rule. Sea race. The two elders of the sacred cult looked at each other with gloomy expressions. Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions. Especially the Sea clan, they'd occupied the southern territory's boundless sea for thousands of years, and they possessed a terrifying foundation. If not for the fact that this race was unable to leave the deep sea for long periods of time, the current master of the Xingzhou continent might not have been a human. If it's the Sea Emperor's decree, the Xingzhou will be in great trouble. If it's just the Sea clan, things may not be so bad, but the two elders of the sacred sect looked at each other. Holy Son, why don't you return to Tao Comprehension Mountain first, and we will go to Cold Moon Immortal Palace to find out the truth. Hearing this, Meng Yuan shook her head lightly. Since it was an experience that the Divine Master had given her, how could she back down? Let's go to Cold Moon Immortal Mountain first. If I'm not wrong, the fourth Divine Envoy's soul consciousness should have appeared there last. With that, Meng Yuan no longer hesitated and walked into the distance. Cough, cough. On the mountain path, Ling Xiao's figure slowly stood up. At this moment, several bones in his body were broken, his aura was weak, and the corners of his mouth were stained with blood. Only his eyes were clear and cold, with a hidden smile. The most important thing in acting was to be realistic. Especially this time, he wasn't sure if the Master God from the Saint would be the one who came. Therefore, he had to be more careful. However, no matter who the Saint sent today, no matter how they investigated, there would only be one answer. The primitive emperor had joined forces with the demons and the sea race to kill the divine envoy and destroy Cold Moon Immortal Palace. In the end, the demons and the sea race returned to southern territory, and the primitive emperor stayed here to clean up the mess. In this way, the attention of the saint should be focused on southern territory and the sea race. As for the 6 reclusive great demon seniors, isn't it time for you to come out and stretch your muscles? Haha. Whether southern territory is chaotic or not, it's still up to you. Don't you know how to fish in troubled waters? Also, the disciple of the 6 demons must be a like-minded person, no, a comrade. Ling Xiao couldn't wait to meet him. He stood up. Lord Ling Xiao stood up. The entire immortal mountain began to boil. The people of Western Territory walked out of the broken cliff and looked at the figure in white who slowly stood up with a sad expression and thunderous applause. At this moment, heaven and earth seemed to be moved by the young man's tenacity, and a drizzle fell. Everyone stood in place with awe, looking at the young man who suddenly raised his hands and shouted, "Evil can never defeat justice! Justice! Justice!" Tens of thousands of cultivators roared to the sky, and spiritual light bloomed from their bodies. However, at this moment, the primitive emperor had a look of disdain on his face. With a wave of his hand, a palm print of death aura appeared in the air and suppressed toward Ling Xiao and the countless figures. At the same time, corpses began to appear around the immortal mountain. It was the million corpse soldiers commanded by the primitive emperor. Boom! On the death seal, ghostly patterns filled the air, revealing endless evil. The void instantly shattered, and the vast divine might stretched for hundreds of miles. At this moment, the primitive emperor had a thought in his mind. If he could take advantage of this opportunity to kill this young man, would he still have a chance to live? However, as soon as this thought appeared, he felt a great fear rising from the bottom of his heart. Even the primitive emperor had an illusion that as long as Ling Xiao willed it, there was no need for anyone else to do anything. Ling Xiao could kill him with just a thought. Evil can never defeat justice. Evil can never defeat justice. Facing the shocking seal of a 7th-grade divine emperor and the hundreds of thousands of corpse soldiers, the cultivators on Cold Moon Immortal Mountain had already lost all hope. The only belief that supported them was what Lord Ling Xiao said just now: evil can never defeat justice. Everyone clenched their fists and roared to the sky. The spiritual light scattered all over the sky, illuminating their faces, making them look even paler and more determined. The ghost seal smashed down and instantly shattered the already broken immortal mountain. In the end, a miracle did not happen. Nearly half of the western border's cultivators and commoners were smashed into pieces by the seal. Only 100 zhang away from Ling Xiao, a pitch-black ancient pagoda stood tall in the sky, blocking a wisp of divine might and protecting thousands of cultivators. However, his body was trembling even more violently. The blood-red clothes on his body were dazzling, as if he was a lamp that had run out of oil. Young master, humph, this treasure is not bad. It can actually block the attack of a divine emperor. Break for this emperor. The primitive emperor snorted coldly, ghost fog lingering around him. Apparently, he was really angry. But, at this moment, a burst of wind-breaking sound came from the distant sky. Then, all the western border's cultivators were pleasantly surprised to see streaks of divine rainbow streaking across the sky and arriving in front of Ling Xiao in the blink of an eye. Dragon Lord! Brother Xiao! Fu! Cousin! Chapter 600. At the foot of the Cold Moon Mountain, Qin Wushuang was dressed in an emperor robe and her beautiful eyes were filled with sorrow. Especially when the young man's face was pale, an indelible murderous intent flashed in her eyes. Behind her, Ning Tiance and Xiao Beifo were also shocked. Fighting against an emperor god as a divine general? What a terrifying battle record! Even in the entire Xingzhou, no one could do it since ancient times. Except for Ling Xiao. It's Empress Wushuang. Empress Wushuang is leading an army to save us. The remaining thousands of martial artists cried out in surprise and lost their voices. Too exciting. I'm just a minor character. Is there a need for me to be so nervous and full of twists and turns? Regardless, looking at the two figures standing side by side not far away, everyone's eyes were filled with sincere reverence. Wushuang. Ling Xiao smiled gently and wiped away the tears from the corner of Qin Wushuang's eyes. You're here. Why didn't you say so earlier? You should have informed General Xiao earlier. Qin Wushuang bit her red lips tightly with tears in her eyes. Today, Xiao Beifa suddenly received a message from Ling Xiao saying that there were demons besieging the Cold Moon Celestial Mountain, and asked him to gather the great Qin experts to lead an army to rescue them. Of course, this time was already calculated by Ling Xiao. In the eyes of Qin Wushuang and the others, he was not a demon. For some things it was better for them not to know. After all, Ling Xiao did not plan to take Qin Wushuang and the others away. The West Border needed a loyal manager after all. I also didn't expect the primitive emperor to be so insidious and collude with the Sea Clan. Ling Xiao sighed lightly and raised his head to look at the figure covered in ghost qi in the void. Big brother, General Shao, can you stop the primitive emperor? Try your best. Ning Tian's expression was calm, while Xiao Beifa's body was surrounded by blood qi and his eyes were filled with battle intent. Kill. Accompanied by everyone's angry roar, Xiao Beifa's body transformed into a blood light and rushed out. The pitch-black heavy halberd in his hand pierced through the clouds and fell toward the primitive emperor's head with destructive power. Humph! A mere fourth-grade divine emperor dares to be so fierce before me. To be honest, the primitive emperor was feeling extremely bitter right now. He was clearly a wise ruler. Why did I end up becoming an evil demon that cannot be tolerated by the world? What if you include me? Ning Tian snorted as he held the azure dragon saber in his hand horizontally. There seemed to be thousands of soldiers following behind him. An unparalleled momentum instantly surged out. Tens of thousands of battle shadows formed a formation and turned into a series of killing attacks. You dare to stand in the way of this emperor? The primitive emperor's eyes were filled with disdain as he struck out with his palm. Instantly, the void that had just calmed down once again rippled with boundless spiritual might. Streaks of divine light fell like the Milky Way, and the sun and moon turned upside down. The joint attack of Ning Tian and Xiao Beifa, the two western border war gods, might not be able to withstand a seventh-rank emperor's aura, but it had the unique dominance of a general. Tens of thousands of pounds of battle intent converged into one person. He was invincible and had the momentum to sweep through the universe. Great heavenly official, Commander Yen, kill. Qin Wushuang turned around and stood side by side with Ling Xiao. Naturally, there was a wave of Emperor's power circulating around his body. In that void, a few more figures walked out. All of them had reached the Emperor realm. They were the great Qin heavenly official Hu Yen and the Imperial Guard Commander Yen Zheng. Kill! Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the void in the distance. Soul light flashed in his eyes. At this moment, he could feel that three extremely powerful auras were rushing towards this place rapidly. However, among the three, two of them were seventh-ranked god emperors. The remaining one was only at the Divine Lord realm. He was not a divine master. Perhaps, with the level of Ling Xiao's divine soul, even if a divine master were to come in person, it would be difficult for Ling Xiao to detect him if he deliberately concealed his aura. However, from the memories of the fourth divine envoy, Ling Xiao had some intuitive understanding of the current saint sect. Needless to say, they had a strong foundation. These past divine masters indeed came from the upper realm. Their cultivation was tyrannical and could crush a world. However, among the many memories, the only thing that interested Ling Xiao was that the past divine masters rarely directly intervened in the matters of the four borders. Most of the time, the divine envoys were in charge of the power. Only this one held all the power in one hand. Moreover, what surprised Ling Xiao even more was that 300 years ago, the Saint sect had undergone a shocking change. The previous divine master was severely injured by the reincarnation of the sky demon, and his whereabouts were unknown. The current divine master descended from the sky and swept across the four borders with his unparalleled cultivation to find the whereabouts of the demon. In the end, he killed the demon himself and became a divine master. All of this seemed to be logical. However, this period of time was really thought-provoking. 300 years ago, the Saint sect began to search for experts of the principal laws. The Divine Master led them to the battlefield to seek enlightenment and ascend to the upper realm. However, these experts of the principal laws, who were led by the Saint sect, all disappeared without exception. Even the divine envoys did not know whether they were alive or dead. According to Partridge Gully's idea, no one could step out of the shackles of this world. The past divine masters never showed their real faces. They were all honorable realm cultivators from the upper realm. Even the saint of the Saint sect was known by people but not his appearance. He was extremely mysterious. Therefore, no one doubted the identity of the Divine Master from the beginning to the end. In other words, no one dared to doubt it. Interesting. Vaguely, Ling Xiao felt that this routine was somewhat familiar. The more mysterious and powerful a living being was, the less likely it would arouse suspicion even if they were replaced. Now, this Divine Master might be hiding some shocking secrets. Boom! Above the void, there was suddenly a vast and mighty divine aura. In the hands of the primitive emperor, 2 ghost seals appeared at the same time and suppressed Ning Tian's and Xiao Beifa. Smoke and dust rose from the heaven and earth. Even with the strength of the 2 war gods, they were completely at a disadvantage when facing the primitive emperor, who was a 7th-grade god emperor. Humph! You overestimate yourself. However, just as the primitive emperor stepped out and was about to rush towards the two loud and clear buzzing sounds suddenly came from the distant void. Buzz! Dazzling golden radiance bloomed from the firmament, and the Tao patterns were thousands of miles long. It was as if 2 new suns were whistling over. Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Finally, it's here. 2 figures in golden robes broke through the void and appeared above the primitive emperor's head. Behind the 2, golden light gushed out and transformed into a bridge. Faintly, there were red-crowned cranes and spiritual sparrows flying around the bridge. It was a scene of immortals. A slender figure stepped over like an immortal, walked across the golden bridge, and gradually revealed his appearance. However, at this moment, his face was covered with immortal clouds, and no one could see his appearance clearly. Furthermore, even with the level of Ling Xiao's divine soul, he could not see through it completely. He could only vaguely feel that it was a young man. "Evil demon, you're courting death!" The golden-robed young man's voice was clear, like the cry of a phoenix from the 9th heaven, containing an unquestionable majesty. His gaze moved from Xiao Beifa, Qin Wushuang, and the others, and finally fell on Ling Xiao. Feeling the latter's injuries, the young man's eyes narrowed slightly, and he nodded slightly. However, for some reason, the saint of the sacred sect felt an inexplicable chill from the bottom of his heart. It was as if under this young man's gentle appearance, there was another appearance hidden. This was a villain, Meng Yuan's instincts told her. "I'm the saint of the sacred sect, and I'm here to slay evil. Evil demon, quickly surrender." Finally, a trace of coldness flashed in Meng Yuan's eyes. She barely suppressed the distracting thoughts in her heart and looked at the primitive emperor coldly. Saint of the sacred sect? At this moment, the immortal mountain was silent, and tens of thousands of people were worshipping. Only Ling Xiao seemed to have a subtle smile on the corner of his mouth. Chapter 601. Rumor had it that the saint had a holy son with a mysterious origin. It was said that when he entered the saint, he was accepted as a disciple by the Divine Master and taught him alone. However, in the entire Xingzhou, all the sects and forces had only heard of this holy son's talent, but had never seen him in person. Who would have thought that he would come out today? Of course, no matter how mysterious the girl's face was, it couldn't escape the system's recognition. 9 heavens arcane body. Heart of 7 orifices. Light, thunder, and illusion, 3 of them. 5,000 providence points. Ling Xiao had a playful look in his eyes, but he sighed in his heart. As expected of the saint. Oh no, it should be the saintess. Meng Yuan's cultivation had already entered the 4th stage of the divine overlord realm. Moreover, what surprised Ling Xiao was that Saintess Meng Yuan had a very faint sealing power on her body. Legend had it that the 9 heavens arcane body was a divine body that only appeared once in 1,000 years. It could deduce cultivation techniques and find flaws. In other words, the longer one fought with it, the lower the chance of winning. She was invincible under the same stage. And the heart of 7 orifices was a state of mind of enlightenment. Others who cultivated for 100 years were no match for her in 10 years. Someone from the saint? So what if you're a holy son? Even Partridgely was killed by me. Anyone who comes today will die. Above the void, the Yuan Emperor sneered, and the ghostly mist outside his body transformed into a ghostly shadow that stood tall between heaven and earth. At this moment, his expression was dignified and his tone was tough, but he was already panicking in his heart. The holy son of the saint had a much higher status than the divine envoy. Moreover, although this holy son had never been born, his name had already spread far and wide. He was the only successor of the divine master. Just this identity alone was enough to make all the forces in the Xingzhou wary. This was because there was an exalted realm cultivator standing behind him. But what can I do? I want to kneel down and cry to you about the injustice in my heart, but someone planted a seal in my soul. See. Arrogant, ignorant. Meng Yuan scolded softly, and golden light shone from her body. She stood there like a blazing sun that wanted to purify all evil in the world. Elders, follow me. Let's kill this demon. With that, Meng Yuan turned into a rainbow light and flew towards Yuan Emperor. Behind him, the two elders of the sacred cult didn't dare to hesitate. Spiritual light shone brightly around their bodies as they materialized into divine shadows, appearing above the Yuan Emperor's head out of thin air. Then, each of them held a Tao artifact in their hands. A bell and a sword slashed towards the primitive emperor. The golden bell imprisoned heaven and earth, and in the blink of an eye, it grew to a size of 1,000 feet. Above the sword, there was also an unparalleled sharpness that sliced the space neatly as it slashed towards the primitive emperor. Faced with the joint attack of two seventh-grade divine emperors, the primitive emperor was unwilling to accept the outcome. His emperor chi filled the sky with boundless ghost intent. Behind him, the ghost shadow's eyes shot out a scarlet light. Just one thread was enough to crush Bailey Qingtian. Boom! The three attacks collided with a loud bang, and the world instantly turned dark. However, the primitive emperor had just ascended to the 7th grade after all. His cultivation base and means were definitely unable to compete with the elders of the sacred sect. With just a single strike, he spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. Evil demon, you deserve to die. In Meng Yuan's hand, a 7-foot-long green sword that seemed to be made of gold slashed down from the sky. The vast golden sun dispersed the ghostly fog, carrying the supreme divinity, blocking the primitive emperor's escape route. If you want to kill me, you'll have to pay a price. At this moment, in everyone's eyes, the primitive emperor was already at the end of his road. However, there was still no panic in his eyes. He turned around and shattered the golden radiance with a seal. His figure once again stood above the sky. 1,000 ghosts returned to the soul, undead sacrifice. Accompanied by a furious roar, hundreds of thousands of undead soldiers below the immortal mountain let out a sharp shriek. The shriek shook the 9 heavens, as if it was the underworld. Wisps of ghostly chi rose from the ground and gathered around the primitive emperor. His aura instantly rose and vaguely reached the peak of the 7th grade divine emperor. What a sinister means! The two elders of the sacred sect looked at each other, with a trace of horror in their eyes. No wonder the 4th divine envoy, an 8th grade divine emperor, died in the hands of this evil demon. At this moment, his cultivation base was extremely close to the 8th grade. If he had the help of the Sea clan experts, Partridge Gully would definitely be defeated. 4th elder, do it! The two elders of the sacred sect looked solemn. The spiritual radiance around them no longer held back and bloomed in the sky. The sound of the great Tao reverberated, and a series of colorful Tao patterns spread out in midair. On the golden bell, there seemed to be phantoms of dragons and elephants floating and coiling around the bell, revealing an aura that could suppress 10,000 realms. In the other divine envoy's hand, the Tao sword divine runes circulated, and the sword's humming resounded through 10,000 miles. Then, the two converged their spiritual power and activated their spiritual treasures to suppress the ghost shadow. The sword light was 10,000 miles long, piercing through the heavy fog and lighting up the void. 10,000 sword intents spread out in all directions, piercing through the sky with unparalleled killing intent. The golden bell turned into a stream of light and evolved into an ancient formation, trapping the primitive emperor's figure in place. Die! The primitive emperor roared angrily, and thousands of ghost shadows appeared in 100 miles around him. It was extremely eerie. A ghost seal, which seemed to be condensed by 10,000 ghosts, appeared above his head. Blood-colored soul light surged from the primitive emperor's forehead. At this moment, he chose to burn his divine soul. A bloody and strange aura swept out in all directions. On the ghost seal, there were tens of thousands of blood patterns climbing and entangling, like a ghost's hand, sending chills down one's spine. 3 great 7th-grade god emperors attacked at the same time, and heaven and earth couldn't bear their power. At this moment, the entire western border was covered with dark clouds and bone-chilling winds. Boom! The ghost seal hung upside down in all directions. The sea of ghost chi turned into wind, blowing from the underworld. It was bone-chilling. Finally, the golden bell fell, and the sword intents slashed down, colliding with the square seal. Boom! At this moment, even Ling Zhao's figure unconsciously retreated 100 miles, looking at the terrifying spiritual power that soared into the sky in surprise. Die! All of you die! In the blur, everyone could hear the primitive emperor's desperate roar. Then, an even more terrifying spiritual power rushed out from the dazzling divine light. Boom boom! The whole world was shattered like ice crystals, and it was extremely broken. However, Ling Zhao's face had an inexplicable smile. Qin Wushuang, Ning Tiance, and the others rushed over from afar and stood next to Ling Xiao. At this moment, everyone had a solemn look in their eyes. The counterattack of a 7th-grade god emperor before his death must be terrifying. Even if the 2 elders of the sacred sect could resist it, they would be seriously injured. Time passed slowly, and heaven and earth were dead silent. However, the hundreds of thousands of corpse soldiers and the god emperors of the Yuan dynasty suddenly had a flash of panic in their eyes. Then, their bodies began to disintegrate. The primitive emperor was dead. These so-called soul slaves naturally didn't have the slightest chance of survival. When light shone down from the sky, everyone was stunned to see the 2 divine envoys of the sacred sect standing in the air, but the primitive emperor was nowhere to be seen. However, at this moment, the aura of the 2 was extremely weak, and their faces were pale. There seemed to be blood stains at the corner of their mouth. Especially the old man with the sword, one of his arms and shoulder was shattered, and he looked miserable. Obviously, even if the 2 of them joined forces, they were seriously injured by the primitive emperor's final attack. Chapter 602. Cough Cough. In the void, Meng Yuan's eyes were cold, and the golden light around her body was somewhat dim. Although she did not participate in the battle just now, just the aftershock of the battle had caused her to be greatly affected. However, now that the demon had been killed, she did not feel too relaxed. On the contrary, she still felt that it was too easy to kill the demon. Although the 2 elders were also seriously injured, since the demon could kill the divine envoy and join forces with the Sea clan to destroy the Cold Moon's celestial palace, how could he not know that the holy sect would send experts? Moreover, where did the legendary expert of the Sea clan go? Meng Yuan's figure descended from the sky and landed in front of Ling Xiao and the others. "What's your name?" At this moment, there was a touch of absolute coldness in her eyes. It was as if everything in this world was just her duty to protect, not living creatures. Even her tone was filled with indifference from the bottom of her heart. Killing the demon was her duty, not her emotions. Ling Xiao. Ling Xiao smiled indifferently, and his eyes were still calm. However, beside him, Qin Wushuang and the others were somewhat restrained. It could not be helped. The holy sect had ruled the Xingzhou for thousands of years, and could be said to be supreme. Whether it was the emperor of the dynasty or the leader of an ancient sect, it was inevitable that they would feel fear when they saw this sect. "Tell me in detail what happened today." Meng Yuan's voice was not mixed with a trace of emotion. It was as if she was born emotionless and without desire. "Oh, a few days ago, I walked out of the Immortals and learned that a great demon had appeared in the western border. This great demon joined forces with the Sea clan and tried to dominate the western border and overthrow the Holy Sect's rule. I discussed with the Cold Moon Celestial Palace Master to protect the cultivators of the western border. Get to the point." Meng Yuan frowned and looked coldly at Ling Xiao. "Didn't you ask me to tell you in detail?" A woman's heart was indeed fickle. Xia Feng and Yu Xiao joined forces to infiltrate the Immortals and released the great demon. Then, today, the primitive emperor led the demons to attack the Cold Moon Celestial Mountain and killed Palace Master Ren. The expert of the Sea clan and one of the great demons left first, leaving the primitive emperor here to clean up the battlefield. Ling Xiao said calmly, but Meng Yuan fell silent. After a long while, she asked coldly, "Have you seen the fourth divine envoy of the Holy Church, Sir Oracle?" It is said that when the divine envoy went to the Yuan dynasty, there was no news of him at all. Ling Xiao shook his head with a puzzled expression. There were some things that he didn't need to point out. Otherwise, it would seem deliberate. Based on the behavior of these people from the Holy Church, he could imagine the complete plot in his head. He, on the other hand, was just an innocent genius from the western border who had been dragged into this disaster. Of course, Ling Xiao had already considered that Partridge Li's death would cause the soul tablet to shatter. However, how could he know such a secret? The evil methods of the God Emperor were not something that a divine general like him could understand. Holy Sun, the divine order. At this moment, an elder of the sacred cult passed over a golden token. I found it on the primitive emperor. Everything seemed to be flawless. No matter how Partridge Li died, it was probably related to the primitive emperor. And Ling Xiao and the rest were the primitive emperor's enemies. They were demon-slaying heroes. This was something that the thousands of disciples present could testify. "Elder Sun." Meng Yuan nodded indifferently and called out softly. Elder Sun immediately understood and walked to the front of the mountain path. Suddenly, a golden light rose around him. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly and had a guess in his heart. He was afraid that this elder of the Holy Church was proficient in some kind of method that could detect the changes in the aura here. Golden light sprinkled down and evolved into thousands of arrays. Gradually, some blurry shadows appeared. It was the unforeseen event that happened here just now. After a long while, Elder Sun walked back to Meng Yuan's side and nodded gently. "Holy Sun, what this young man said is true. Indeed, a great demon and the Sea clan had descended and killed Rin Yuang. Send a message to the first divine envoy to investigate the Sea clan from the western border to the southern border. Pay attention to the demon's tracks." Meng Yuan nodded. She didn't dare to delay this matter, but her eyes were fixed on Ling Xiao from beginning to end. "Since the demon has been eliminated, let's disperse." "Yes." On Mount Han, the cultivators of the western border bowed and turned to leave. Before leaving, everyone walked in front of Ling Xiao and bowed respectfully. "Lord Ling Xiao, we will take our leave. See you again." Ling Xiao's expression was gentle as he returned their greetings. After this matter, he believed that his good name would soon spread throughout the western border. However, just as Ling Xiao and the others were about to leave, Meng Yuan's eyes suddenly flashed with killing intent. "Lord Ling Xiao, please wait." Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a gentle smile on his face. "I wonder if Holy Sun has any instructions? Just now, I saw that young master has a pagoda that can imprison a great demon. I wonder if you can let me take a look?" "Oh? Holy Sun's request is a little too much. Ling Xiao shook his head, but there was a smile on his face. Why, is Holy Sun planning to snatch my treasure? Not really, I'm just curious about what kind of treasure can help you, a divine general, to imprison 7 divine emperors. After Meng Yuan finished her words, the 2 elders of the sacred sect's faces suddenly turned serious. The 7 orifices exquisite heart of Tao was rare in the world. Not only could she comprehend the great Tao, but it was obvious that Meng Yuan's mind was also extremely sharp. Of course, the most important point was that she was an outsider and had never entered the game. Therefore, she had to maintain a vigilance against anyone. This was the so-called, the onlooker sees the game more clearly than the player involved. Although Ling Zhao's plan was exquisite for Ren Yueying and the others, it was because they believed that Ling Zhao's plan was simple. Originally, they believed that Ling Xiao was a disciple of the divine envoy, and had witnessed many of his righteous deeds. But now, there were many doubts in Meng Yuan's eyes about the originally flawless plan. There wasn't anything wrong with the way things were going. Everything seemed to be a meticulously planned scam by the primitive emperor and the Sea clan. But from the beginning to the end, this young man seemed to be in the game, pushing the development of the situation. And he was lucky enough to survive. The world was ignorant and believed that seeing was believing. But sometimes what one saw could also be an illusion. Meng Yuan had just entered the world, and she didn't have any feelings for anyone. She firmly believed in slaying demons and protecting the world. My treasure is naturally very powerful. It's easy to imprison divine emperors. Ling Zhao's lips curled into a smile, and immediately, there was a layer of horrifying ripples above his head. Before the 2 divine envoys and Meng Yuan could react, the 3 of them, together with Ling Xiao, had already disappeared. With Ling Zhao's current 7th grade divine emperor divine soul, ordinary divine emperors wouldn't be able to resist the realm devouring if he acted rashly. Therefore, when Meng Yuan and the others reacted, they had already been sucked in. Looking at the picturesque scenery before them, the 3 of them were astonished. This was especially true for Meng Yuan, whose beautiful eyes revealed an additional trace of shock. Am I really overthinking? She was the saint of the saint and had many tricks up her sleeves. But she understood that there was always someone better than you. Therefore, she wasn't interested in Ling Zhao's secret. She just felt that everything that had happened was too coincidental. But now, it seemed that she had underestimated the young man in front of her. In this way, there was nothing unreasonable about it. Even with the 2 elders' strength, they couldn't resist the power of the treasure if they were caught off guard, let alone the primitive emperor and the few low-grade divine emperors. Seems like Meng Yuan has misunderstood you. Meng Yuan said softly, but she saw a gentle smile on the young man's face. Chapter 603. Saint Meng Yuan, how did you misunderstand me? Do you think that I'm in cahoots with the demons? Ling Xiao stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking carefree. The star robe shone with a dazzling brilliance. Meng Yuan shook her head slightly, and an apologetic look flashed in her eyes. She had seen the respect the people of Xizjiang had for Ling Xiao, and there was no lack of divine kings among them. Although most people in the world were foolish, there was no fool among those who could cultivate to the divine king level. Maybe I'm thinking too much. Meng Yuan sighed and bowed slightly to Ling Xiao. What you did today is righteous, and Meng Yuan admires your methods. However, as a righteous person, it's our duty to kill demons. Those who are not of our race must have different intentions. Killing them is a form of protection. Moreover, the demons are treacherous now, so Meng Yuan has to be careful. Treacherous demons. That's right. Ling Xiao nodded. Saint, did the Divine Master come to Xizjiang? Is there something you need, young master? Meng Yuan looked at Ling Xiao calmly. Even though he had used his methods to get rid of suspicion, Meng Yuan still felt uneasy. It was an intuition. Whenever she saw Ling Zhao's handsome face, she would feel terrified? But how could it be? With Meng Yuan's strength, she was definitely the strongest among her peers in Shijiang, not to mention Shijiang. But now, she actually felt fear from a young man? Meng Yuan inexplicably felt that there was something wrong with this young man. Now, the saint is in charge of everything in the saint sect. Young master, you can tell the saint anything. The two saint elders smiled gently. They did not have much prejudice against Ling Xiao. The saint sect's third elder, Xuananji, was good at the saint sect's secret technique, the Tao of tracing. Just now, he had seen Ling Xiao vomiting blood and falling to the ground again and again in order to kill the demons. But in the end, this young man still stood in front of the common people and stopped the demons. Although the saint was meticulous and thoughtful, it was obvious that this young man should be a person with great luck since he could survive the demons. Such a person should join the saint sect and be its backbone. The Holy Sun will take charge of the holy sect? Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows and looked at Meng Yuan in surprise. The fact that a mere fourth-grade divine overlord could take charge of the saint sect spoke volumes. With Ling Xiao's intelligence, he quickly thought of two possibilities. Firstly, Meng Yuan had a great background. She might even have come from the upper world. Otherwise, the Divine Lord would not have protected her like this. Secondly, the Divine Master had an important matter to attend to. Thinking back to what he had done before, perhaps in the entire saint sect, only this disciple who had been cultivating with him since young could be considered a completely trustworthy person. However, what made Ling Xiao a little suspicious was that this saint was obviously a model of righteousness, and his cultivation was only for the sake of slaying demons. Such a temperament was in line with the teachings of the saint. However, if she were to find out about the Divine Master's actions, would her Tao heart directly crumble? No matter what kind of secret the Divine Master of the sacred sect was hiding, the 9 Nether-Down Phoenix clan's misfortune was real. Perhaps he had never thought that someone from that clan would be lucky enough to survive. That's right. Meng Yuan looked coldly at the elder who spoke, as if blaming him for speaking too much. Where did the Divine Master go? Ling Xiao asked casually, but Meng Yuan's eyes flashed with obvious impatience. Is there anything else, sir? If not, please open the spiritual treasure. We have important matters to attend to in the southern border. That's all. I just want to correct the saint on one thing. Ling Xiao's lips curled into a playful smile. I am not an accomplice of the demons. Haha, Lord Ling Xiao, you must be joking. Our saint is just being overly cautious. The two elders of the sacred sect laughed awkwardly and tried to explain for Meng Yuan. Because I am the one you are looking for, the true demon, the great demon, the sky demon. Ling Xiao smiled faintly, and a domineering aura rose around him. Hearing that, the two elders' faces stiffened, and there was a hint of gloominess between their brows. Sir, this is not a joke. Do I look like I am joking with you? Ling Xiao shook his head, and his eyes suddenly turned pitch black. At the same time, there seemed to be a demonic aura in the realm. The originally clear sky darkened instantly. There was a demonic sun hanging in the sky, revealing the vastness of the world. All the light in the world was annihilated, and only that sun was eternal. The two divine envoys of the sacred sect opened their mouths wide, and they felt a chill rising from the bottom of their feet to the top of their heads. How is this possible? The sky demon. This aura is the sky demon? A sky demon has appeared in the Xingzhou? Only Meng Yuan's expression turned serious at first, but it soon turned calm. That's right. That's why she was so afraid. She wasn't afraid of this young man's cultivation, but his identity. His identity couldn't be changed. With that thought, divine light scattered around Meng Yuan, transforming into a majestic immortal palace, and a ray of clear light bloomed in the demonic light. There seemed to be thousands of miles of immortal light, and ancient trees formed a forest, filled with endless vitality. At that moment, there was a slight fluctuation in her realm. The exquisite heart of 7 orifices was so terrifying. When one's mind was connected and comprehended, the breakthrough was naturally achieved. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows and nodded slightly. She was indeed the daughter of destiny with 5,000 providences. Her temperament was indeed terrifying. The sky demon was a demonic barrier to the people of the Xingzhou. But Meng Yuan was able to find an opportunity to break through in her fear. 3 divine envoys, come to the western border quickly. The sky demon has appeared. A divine token in Meng Yuan's hand shone with golden light. But when the golden light floated in the air, it was inexplicably blocked by an invisible divine power. Meng Yuan's eyes narrowed, and for the first time she looked serious. Since this demon had set up such an exquisite chess game, he must have been prepared to deal with the sacred sect. In this strange space, one could advance or retreat. If the one who came was a divine master, even if his scheme was exposed, he could escape into this world and temporarily avoid danger. Since he had brought the 3 of them into this world, he must have enough confidence to kill all of them. It's useless. This is my realm. Other than me, no one can send out their divine sense or soul consciousness. Ling Xiao smiled faintly and looked at the 2 divine envoys of the sacred sect. If the 2 of them were at their peak, it would take some effort to kill them. But now the primitive emperor was actually an important chess piece in Ling Xiao's game. He took the blame for killing and severely injuring the divine envoys of the sacred sect. Using a 7th-grade divine emperor as a chess piece, wouldn't it be a pity if he couldn't make full use of it? Knowing the heavens and the earth, you are all ant. Stepping on the moon with the galaxy, I am not afraid of 10,000 enemies. So, the 4th divine envoy and the cold moon palace master died in your hands? Even the primitive emperor was just a chess piece that cooperated with you? Meng Yuan sighed softly. By now, she had more or less figured out the whole story. But there was one thing she was puzzled about. How did the sky demon get involved with the Sea Clan? Even the divine master was full of praise for Elder Sun's tracing method. Since he had sensed the aura of the Sea Clan, it couldn't be wrong. Chapter 604. That's right. As expected of the heart of 7 orifices. Ling Xiao didn't deny it. In any case, he didn't intend to let the 3 of them go today. No matter why the divine master handed the power of the saint to Meng Yuan, he probably wouldn't notice that the 3 of them were missing. As long as their soul consciousness wasn't broken, the saint would most likely think that the 3 of them were investigating the murder of the divine envoys. This way, Ling Xiao would have time to get more useful information from the saintess. What? The people of the saint were upright, loyal, and unyielding. They would never bow down to demons. The 4th divine envoy was the best example. TSK. The 4th divine envoy wasn't a woman. There was nothing more effective than the simplest and most direct way to deal with someone like Meng Yuan. Take off her clothes, take her body, occupy her sect, and be her king. One word, TSK. Once her Tao heart was broken, she could be manipulated at will. Is the Sea tribe really rebelling? Meng Yuan raised her head and looked coldly at Ling Xiao. Hasn't the Sea tribe always wanted to rebel? Don't tell me you don't know? Ling Xiao didn't answer. Instead, he asked Meng Yuan a question. The latter frowned and didn't say anything. Everyone knew about the Sea tribe's intentions. When the saint ruled the Xingzhou, the Sea tribe was unwilling to submit and was forced to retreat to the depths of the South Sea. However, the Sea tribe was similar to the demon race. They were made up of many different races. But 500 years ago, an ocean emperor suddenly appeared in the Sea tribe. He conquered the Sea tribe and became the overlord of the southern border. If they didn't want to rebel, why would the ocean emperor waste so much effort and hundreds of years to unify the Sea tribe? All right, Saint. We've chatted for so long. It's time to send you on your way. Ling Xiao smiled faintly and looked up at the sky. Suddenly, 2 demonic figures gradually appeared in the sky above. When he brought Meng Yuan into the realm, He had already sent a message to Xionghuan to ask him and Double Shadow to return. Otherwise, do you think I don't know the famous saying that villains die because they talk too much? TSK. Ling Xiao, although you are a sky demon, if you want to kill me, you will have to pay the price. Meng Yuan said calmly. The spiritual light around her gradually became brighter. In just a few breaths, the mystical palace above his head had already grown to a size of 1,000 feet. Among them, divine trees towered into the sky, lightning bolts struck out in all directions, and a radiant sacred sun blossomed with an overflowing radiance. There was a faint illusory intent within it that confused one's heart, and it gave one the misconception that one was already within it even before the divine watchtower arrived. Looks like the chosen one still hasn't given up. Ling Zhao's expression was gentle, but there was a hint of disdain between his brows. Above the void, ripples began to spread out. Immediately after, Meng Yuan and the other two saw several god emperors standing in the void, looking at them with mocking expressions. How is that possible? This demon actually has such power? The expressions of the two elders of the sacred sect changed drastically as a chill spread from the bottom of their hearts. Originally, they wanted to rely on their 7th-grade realm to fight to the death. But from the looks of it, it was hard to say whether he would fight or not. After all, he was old, his spiritual power was exhausted, and his body was weak. But fighting to the death was much easier. I really didn't expect you to have such wings under the nose of the sacred sect. Meng Yuan sighed softly. At this moment, there was no trace of despair in her eyes, let alone fear. She was never worried about dying at the hands of the demon, but about the people of the world. The 4th Divine Envoy and Cold Moon Divine Palace had already been destroyed at the hands of the Sky Demon. Next, he would probably repeat his old plan and kill the 4 Divine Envoys one by one while they were all at the same border. Although the Divine Master's cultivation was supreme, seeing how the people of the western border respected him, the 4 borders would probably soon be under his control. The human forces were still manageable, as Sect Master Taishan was already the peak of the human race. But this person's background was mysterious, and he was dedicated to the Tao. He was not even moved by the sacred sect's recruitment, so he probably would not side with anyone. But the demon race and the Sea clan were already at odds with the human race. With this young man's temperament, he could probably turn them over. And there were some extremely terrifying existences among those two races. Xingzhou was shackled by heaven and earth, and could only have one venerable. But if the people rebelled, even the Divine Master would not be able to reverse the situation, right? Was this world really going to fall into the hands of the demons? Inexplicably, Meng Yuan's eyes flashed with vicissitude. She had been cultivating with the Divine Master since she was young. Although she was still young, her talent was indeed terrifying. The Divine Master had even collected the world's ultimate techniques and historical records for her to comprehend. In the vast changes of history, Meng Yuan's horizons had been broadened. In fact, he was not the least bit inferior to the most powerful experts of the Xingzhou continent. She cared about the people of the world, but she had no desires. This was originally an extremely contradictory personality, but it was perfectly integrated in her. Cultivation was to achieve immortality and protect the people. In her eyes, the people of the world were all equal. Only demons could not be tolerated. Kill them, and her Tao would be complete. If there were no more demons in the world one day, so what if she lost her cultivation? I'll give you 2 options. If you submit to me, I'll let you live. Otherwise, I'll make you wish you were dead. Ling Xiao smiled faintly, but Meng Yuan did not speak. She unsheathed the ancient sword in her hand, which emitted a dazzling golden light. Clang! In an instant, a dazzling divine light pierced through the air and cleared the demonic clouds. Meng Yuan's figure floated up like a fairy and stood in the center of the divine light. She was peerless and eternal. At this moment she was the most dazzling divine light in the world, especially the divine watchtower above her head. It was even more solid and majestic, as if it was an independent world. It was filled with indescribable majesty. "Are you trying to act cool with me?" Ling Zhao's lips curled into a playful smile. He suddenly raised his hand and gently pressed it down. Buzz! A terrifying boom suddenly resounded through the sky. There seemed to be a demonic palm above Meng Yuan's head that had pierced through the ages. It turned into a black curtain and fell from the sky. The space instantly shattered. A demonic figure stood in the sky and looked down on the world. Meng Yuan's imposing and ancient aura suddenly froze. Then, her eyes widened as she saw the world overturn. The sun and moon fell from the sky. Heaven and earth were reversed and yin and yang were no longer there. As for her figure, it was actually being forcefully suppressed by a divine power that seemed to make everything in the world vanish. Boom! The entire realm was filled with smoke and dust. The saintess of the sacred sect, who was known as the #1 peerless genius in the Central Territory, the personal disciple of the sacred sect's divine master, and the genius of the sacred sect, who stood above her peers in the Xingzhou continent, couldn't even withstand a single palm from that demon? Hiss! The two elders of the sacred sect trembled. Their eyes widened as they felt an indescribable chill in their hearts. Could it be that this demon wasn't reborn but was actually still alive? Capture him alive! Ling Xiao raised his head and looked at the two elders of the sacred sect. Their auras were weak and their hearts were trembling. His smile grew wider. In the next instant, Xiong Huan, Xing Shen, Hua Heng, and the others lifted their feet and rushed toward the two elders. Xing Shen and Hua Heng had become rank 5 martial emperors with the nourishment of countless medicinal pills. Xiong Huan's battle prowess was needless to say. It was naturally easy for him to deal with a heavily injured rank 7 martial emperor. Boom! Boom! Boundless spiritual might appeared in the sky. It was like a raging sea, intimidating the world. However, Ling Zhao's figure suddenly disappeared from where he stood. Chapter 605. Where the smoke and dust dispersed, countless cracks appeared on the ground. Meng Yuan fell to the ground. Her golden robe had long been torn apart, revealing her snow-white skin. Blood dripped from the corner of her mouth, and several of her bones were broken. However, she didn't seem to care at all. Her eyes were empty and lifeless. She lost. She wasn't surprised. Today, she was trapped in the spiritual treasure and was outnumbered. She couldn't escape defeat. She just didn't expect that she would be defeated by Ling Zhao's palm. Even if he was the sky demon, Meng Yuan didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. Because her Jiutian Xian body was a divine body that only appeared once in 1,000 years. She only needed to look at any cultivation technique to understand it, find the flaws, and finally kill the enemy. However, she didn't even see how the young man attacked before she was defeated. All of a sudden, Meng Yuan felt that her 20 years of cultivation were meaningless. What was invincible? What was invincible? It turned out that her vision was too narrow after all. Beat. The destined girl's Tao heart is covered in dust. Congratulations to the host for plundering 500 luck points and 5,000 villain points. It's starting already? Ling Zhao's lips curled into a playful smile. Indeed, the stronger one's Tao heart was, the easier it would be to shatter it. The reason why he suppressed this woman so quickly was to let her know what was invincible and what was divine. The Jiutian Xian body was indeed mysterious. In the entire Xingzhou, there were only a handful of people who could break through to the Divine Lord realm at the age of 20. However, no matter what kind of divine body it was not worth mentioning in Ling Zhao's eyes. Moreover, Meng Yuan didn't take Ling Xiao seriously from the beginning. Sacred child Meng Yuan, oh no, sacred daughter Meng Yuan, you still have a chance to choose your own fate. I have always been merciful, so I will give you another chance. Ling Xiao smiled faintly. He lowered his head and looked at the celestial beauty whose hair was draped over her shoulders. A sinister glint flashed in his eyes. This was a face that was as clean as the water in the jade lake. Untainted, ethereal, and pure. Her pair of starry eyes were cold and dark, but they also contained a hint of stubbornness. Looking at her, Ling Xiao felt as if he was looking at a lotus at the peak of a snowy mountain. Holy and proud, overflowing with immortal energy. Humph. Meng Yuan's beautiful face froze, and she suddenly closed her eyes, as if she was fearless of death. Saintess, your peerless beauty is truly pitiful. Ling Xiao was not surprised by the attitude of the saintess. However, it would be easy to kill her, but she was perhaps the person who understood the Divine Master the most in the entire Xingzhou. If he could make them submit, the effect would be even greater. Moreover, Meng Yuan's heart was indeed filled with righteousness. However, the Lord God was not necessarily a righteous person. I, Ling Xiao, may be the sky demon, but I am willing to help the world see the other side. There is a beauty in the Holy Church. She is independent from the world. When she looks, she can topple a city. When she looks again, she can topple a country. When she looks again, she can topple a country. Ling Xiao looked up at the sky with a desolate expression. It's a pity to kill a beauty like the saintess. Shameless demon, you will eventually be despised by the world and destroyed by the Holy Church. Meng Yuan took a deep breath, and the hostility towards Ling Xiao in her heart grew stronger. This damned demon, how dare he trick me like this? Do you think you can erase my will just by saying a few nice words? I, Meng Yuan, have always been filled with righteousness. I am the natural enemy of demons. You want me to submit to you? Wishful thinking. Saintess, look at the clear sky and bright moon. Why don't we do something romantic? Ling Xiao smiled eerily and walked towards Meng Yuan. Meng Yuan's beautiful face froze, and she looked at Ling Xiao in horror. Especially the evil smile on the young man's face, which made her feel a chill from the bottom of her heart. Buzz. Spiritual light suddenly surged in Meng Yuan's hand, but before she could imprint it on her head, her entire body seemed to be bound by an invisible giant hand, and she could no longer move. Saintess, what are you trying to do? Ling Xiao's eyes were cold, but his tone was surprisingly gentle. Suicide? Warning me? You're just a fourth-grade divine overlord, and you're in Ling Xiao's territory. Even if you want to die, you have to get my permission first. Buzz. A strange demonic aura turned into chains and wrapped around Meng Yuan's body. In an instant, Meng Yuan felt her body become heavy, and she could no longer feel her spiritual energy and divine soul. Her body was bound by the demonic aura, and she could not move at all. At this moment, Meng Yuan's eyes were finally filled with fear. What are you trying to do? Ling Xiao, kill me if you can. Otherwise, one day I will tear you into pieces. In your eyes, those who are called demons are bad people? Over the years, many people have died in the hands of the saint, right? Ling Xiao's expression was calm, and he did not care about Meng Yuan's screams. Life is full of ups and downs. For those who are destined, as long as they live, there will always be a chance to turn things around and slap them in the face. But I have to give you time. The people that the saint killed were all demons. They deserved to die. Meng Yuan shouted coldly, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. On that picturesque face there was a trace of extreme hatred towards the devil. You're wrong. The saint only needs to give these people the title of demons in advance. The path to immortality is to fight against the heavens and earth. What's wrong with killing people? Ling Xiao shook his head and looked down at the girl in front of him. All creatures have spirit. This world does not belong to the human race. Why do demons deserve to die? You are twisting words and forcing logic. Are you saying that it's right for demons to kill the common people? Meng Yuan was stunned for a moment, then she said angrily. Kill the common people? 1,000 years ago, the demon clan occupied the Xingzhou continent. Later, the divine master of the sacred sect descended and slaughtered millions of demon spirits with his own strength. Only then was the demon clan forced to retreat to the cold lands of the northern border for 1,000 years. If you put it that way, the divine master seems to be the greatest evil in the world. Suddenly, Meng Yuan's expression froze. Although she knew that this demon was just messing with her Tao heart, she did not know how to refute him. Those who obey the saint will live, and those who defy the saint will die. Is this the light you yearn for? Holy child Meng Yuan, you're too ridiculous. Ling Xiao stood with his hands behind his back. His jade-like face was 30% indifferent and 70% weathered. Light and darkness are ancient existences. How can they be decided by a single word from the human race? No, it's not like that. Demons are cruel and temperamental. I slay demons to protect the common people. Holy child, do you know about the 9 Serenities Phoenix clan? Ling Xiao suddenly opened his mouth and interrupted Meng Yuan. Of course I do. Meng Yuan's eyes were filled with confusion. This holy child probably had doubts in her heart. The 9 Serenities Phoenix clan surrendered to the saint 300 years ago. But what happened to them in the end? The 9 Serenities Phoenix clan was led to the upper world by the Divine Master because of their righteousness. Everyone knows about this. Meng Yuan's eyes were filled with confusion. She clearly did not know why Ling Xiao asked this question. Everyone knows? What a good everyone knows. But why did I hear that the Divine Master massacred the 9 Serenities Phoenix clan just for the nether fire that they were born with? A cold glint flashed across Ling Xiao's eyes. For some reason, the world turned cold. No, impossible. Chapter 606. The Divine Master lied and said that the entire Dark Phoenix clan had gone to the upper realm, but I have a servant who was lucky enough to escape a wisp of her soul from the disaster 300 years ago. Does the saintess want to see her? Ling Xiao's voice was filled with a demonic nature. It was like a huge bell ringing in Meng Yuan's ears. At this moment, the saintess felt her heart tremble. She seemed to see a sea of blood, a mountain of corpses, and many dark phoenixes that were killed. Demon, how dare you mess with my Tao heart? Meng Yuan clenched her teeth and forced herself to remain clear-headed. Fine. Since you don't believe me, I will slowly reveal the Holy Church's true face and let you see the truth. Ling Xiao sighed softly with a helpless expression. This saintess seemed to have been taught thoroughly by the Divine Master. What the demon said was all lies. What I saw was the demon's methods. Interesting. This directly eliminated the possibility of her defection from her heart. Shameless demon, no matter what you do, don't think of making me submit. Shameless demon. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows and finally nodded. You're right. In order to prove your inner thoughts, I think, I need to prove the demon's shamelessness. Boom. Suddenly, a dazzling spiritual light appeared around Ling Xiao. Then, Meng Yuan was dumbfounded to see the starry robe on the young man's body disintegrate, revealing a well-proportioned and slender body. At this moment, Meng Yuan felt despair that she had never felt before. She suddenly regretted infuriating the demon in front of her again and again. She should have known that the demon's actions were unscrupulous and cruel. However, she still underestimated the demon's shamelessness. The most romantic thing I can think of is to do it 10 times a day until you realize that you can't go anywhere. Only then will you treat me as the treasure in your heart. Ling Xiao smiled. He grabbed Meng Yuan's neck and lifted her in front of him. No, don't. Meng Yuan's eyes were filled with tears and panic. She was not afraid of death. She was not even afraid of the demon's torture. However, she did not expect the demon to. The intense pain seemed to come from her soul. Ling Xiao's brutality caused Meng Yuan's body and mind to tremble. However, at this time, her spiritual energy was sealed and she couldn't move. She could only watch the person in front of her rise and fall. When the sky gradually darkened, all the fluctuations in the realm finally calmed down. Ling Xiao stood up, stretched, and took out the real divine writ from Meng Yuan's bosom. Then, he walked away without looking back. Saintess Meng Yuan, from today onwards, I will come here every day to discuss the demonic nature with you. Poochie. Beep, the destined woman's mind has collapsed. Congratulations to host for plundering 1,000 luck points and 10,000 villain points. From the beginning to the end, Ling Xiao had not probed Meng Yuan's soul. Since the Divine Master had placed a trap in the sea of soul of a divine emissary of the saint, there was no need to mention the Divine Master's personal disciple in front of him. However, in Partridge Gully's memory, even he did not know Meng Yuan's true appearance. He did not even know her name. In other words, since Meng Yuan was brought into the saint by the Divine Master, she had only seen the elders and divine emissaries on the day she was appointed as the saint. As a result, originally, Ling Xiao was counting on the secret guards that he had placed in advance to help him during the trip to Nanjiang. However, it seemed that it was not so troublesome now. The Sea clan gathered in Nanjiang. Although the human race was weak, there were still a few clans with a long history. With Ling Xiao's identity, it seemed that he was still lacking if he wanted to command them. However, with the saint here, who would not obey? As for the first divine emissary, divine emissary, the Sea clan was rampant and dared to join forces with the demons to kill the divine emissary and slaughter the common people. Now that I am in charge of the saint, I am sending you to your death. Do you have any objections? When the Divine Master finally reacted, the saint might no longer have 4 divine emissaries. There might only be 2 left. Oh no. Since there was still 1 divine emissary in Dongjiang, it was not impossible to kill him while the Divine Master was not paying attention to the affairs of the saint. Ling Xiao lowered his head and looked at the divine token in his hand. The smile in his eyes deepened. He originally thought that the saint's powerhouse would definitely leave a soul tablet in Enlightenment Mountain. However, it seemed that he had worried too much. There were thousands of different soul senses in the divine token. It was obvious that the Divine Master had placed this in the soul sea of the saint's powerhouse. Whenever someone died, the divine token would sense it. As for the soul tablet, if the Divine Master really had a backup plan, now that Partridgely had died, he would have rushed to Shijiang. After all, Meng Yuan was his only disciple. How could he let her take the risk when even Partridgely could not deal with the demon? Thinking of this, Ling Xiao already had an idea. As a villain, he naturally had to be more cautious. It was not until Ling Xiao's figure disappeared that tears fell from Meng Yuan's eyes. At first, it was silent, but gradually, it became heart-wrenching and extremely mournful. At this moment, she could still feel the intense pain coming from her body. However, compared to this pain, the scar in her heart was even more despairing. Meng Yuan probably never dreamed that one day, her body would be sullied by a demon. She had a relationship with the devil that she hated and loathed the most. She was a righteous person, and her heart was always pure and flawless. However, now, her Tao heart and her physical body were not clean. When she thought of what the demon had said before he left, Meng Yuan only felt her body turn cold. It was more painful than death. Ah! Master! Xiong Huan and the others descended from the sky and threw the 2 divine envoys of the saint to the ground. At this moment, the 2 of them had all their bones broken. Their faces were ashen, and they no longer had any of their former majesty. Demon! You will not have a good ending. The Divine Master will definitely sense our deaths. When that time comes, who said I was going to kill you? Ling Xiao's lips curled into a smile. He motioned for Xiong Huan to bring the 2 of them to the medicine hall. You won't kill us? Demon, don't think you can make us submit. Even if we die. Noisy. Ling Xiao frowned slightly. His eyes were overflowing with cold light. When they fell into the eyes of the 2 divine emperors, they instantly felt a chill in their hearts. they silently shut their mouth. They did not know why, but at this moment, they felt that if they fell into the demon's hands, they would suffer more pain than death. When Ling Zhao's figure descended from the sky, Shi Dandi, Han Zhan and the others put down the medicine cauldrons in their hands and bowed deeply to him. Looking at the majestic palace in front of him and the golden plaque hanging above it, Ling Zhao's eyes flashed with surprise. Medicine King Hall. Not bad. You've learned how to entertain yourself? Come on. Tools. Master. Shi Dandi smiled gently. The blood energy on his body rippled, as if he had been reborn. Old Dan, I've brought 2 medicine slaves to the Medicine King Hall. In the future, you won't have to work so hard to make elixirs. Ling Xiao smiled gently. Suddenly, a dazzling soul light flashed in his eyes. Then, everyone was dumbfounded when they saw 2 strange soul pillars standing in front of the palace. There were demonic runes on them, and their evil power was vast. It was frightening. This is, Shi Dandi felt that the scene in front of him was somewhat familiar. Chapter 607. This soul pillar is. King Shi looked at Ling Xiao with a puzzled expression, but when he saw the latter's calm expression, a trace of fear appeared in his heart. Master, I've overstepped my boundaries. Pill Elder was no longer the almighty Pill Emperor of the western border. He was just Ling Zhao's soul slave. No matter how confused he was, he didn't dare to open his mouth to ask. Come here to refine pills in the future. Ling Xiao casually threw the 2 elders onto the soul pillar. Demonic runes lit up one after another, transforming into chains that wrapped around the 2 of them, binding them. An indescribable devouring power gushed out from the chains and began to corrode the bodies of the 2 elders. The soul pillar was a technique from the Ghost Clan's classic, the Dark Enyama scripture. It could absorb one's soul and spiritual energy. Ling Zhao's hand seals changed. Visible spiritual energy turned into a dark river and flowed out from the 2 Pill Emperors' bodies. It gathered on the square and spread out like a spider web. Then, Ling Xiao flicked his finger lightly, and 10 streaks of fire fell from the sky and landed on the spiritual light, jumping around non-stop. In a short moment, a spiritual energy fire array was formed. In the future, you don't need to use your spiritual energy to refine pills. Just use this array. As everyone knew, cultivators needed to use their spiritual energy to create a fire and control it with their soul power. The consumption of both was very demanding on one's mind. Moreover, Han Zhan and the others were only divine generals. The spiritual energy in their bodies was limited, so the efficiency of refining pills was naturally low. But now, with the 2 Pill Emperors' spiritual energy nourishing the spiritual energy, they only needed to use their soul power to control the fire. Damn! It was as if they had accidentally achieved a breakthrough in their technique. Of course, the spiritual energy that Ling Xiao had set up was just a wisp of its power. It wasn't the source of the spiritual energy. Otherwise, with Han Zhan and the others' strength, they would have been familiar with it, let alone control it. The disciples of the Hall of Medicine looked at each other and swallowed hard. Although the spiritual energy on the 2 Pill Emperors had dimmed, the wisp of Pill Emperor's power was real. Gulp. Strangely, they felt that it was good to be a tool. At the very least, they would not be reduced to animals that produced spiritual energy like these 2 God Emperors. Ling Xiao, you'll die a horrible death. The 2 elders cursed angrily, their expressions filled with grief and indignation. It was easy to imagine the shame and anger in their hearts right now. The elder of the sacred cult, who used to be high and mighty, had fallen to such a state. It was sad and lamentable. Oh, old Pill, break their teeth and pull out their tongues. Remember to refine medicinal pills every day and feed them. Make sure they're full of energy. Ling Xiao smiled indifferently and nodded slowly. These 2 emperor gods should be able to last for a few years. Yes, Master. The disciples of the Hall of Medicine bowed and did not get up for a long time. Only after a long while did they burst into cheers. We don't need to use our lives to refine pills anymore. Master's actions are actually showing concern for us. With a master like this, what more could this servant ask for? Ling Xiao, I won't let you go even if I become a ghost. The two elders of the sacred cult screamed in despair. Their voices were extremely desolate. I'll eat pills refined with my own spiritual energy? Make sure I'm full of energy and then provide you with spiritual energy to refine pills? It seemed like they were forever moving. Demon! This Ling Xiao was simply a demon. Ling Xiao stood in the sky with his hands behind his back. Xiong Huan followed closely behind him without saying a word. Xiong Huan. I'm here. In the Sky Demon Palace, is there a white-haired woman? Ling Xiao's eyes were filled with vicissitudes of life, and his voice was low. Ever since that day when he saw the soul consciousness in the Sky Demon's skull, there had always been a figure in his heart that had not dissipated. That feeling was like a kind of fetter. He always had a vague feeling that that woman was inextricably linked to the Sky Demon and even the Sky Demon's fall. White-haired woman. Xiong Huan frowned slightly. Master, there are many white-haired women in the Sky Demon Palace. May I know which one you're asking about? Many? Ling Xiao was stunned for a moment. It's a beautiful young girl who can use the Tao of Ice and Snow. Tao of Ice and Snow? Xiong Huan's frown deepened. There is indeed a demon general in the Sky Demon Palace who is proficient in the Tao of Ice. However, she is not white-haired, but black-haired. Furthermore, she is not a young girl. Is there no one else besides her? Ling Xiao was puzzled. If she was not an expert from the Sky Demon Palace, why would she save him? Furthermore, could she have sensed that the Sky Demon had been reborn? No. Xiong Huan's tone was very certain. It seemed that the white-haired girl was not an expert from the Sky Demon Palace. Freezing a world with a thought? Could she be from the immortal race? However, why did Ling Xiao feel a sense of closeness from her that came from the same source or even from the same bloodline? Master, it's okay. Wait for me for a day. As soon as he finished speaking, Ling Xiao's figure instantly disappeared and reappeared in Heavenly Hall. However, just as his figure appeared, his eyes suddenly narrowed. In front of the Sky Palace, a tall and slender figure stood there quietly. There seemed to be a demonic aura circulating around her. In front of her, Ning clenched her fists tightly. There was a trace of embarrassment on her face. I don't want to fight with you. I can't beat you. This is. Ling Xiao stood on the spot and frowned slightly. For a moment, he thought that folded shadow had transformed and was playing with Ning. However, that was not right. Although the demonic aura around the tall woman was terrifying, her cultivation level was only at the first stage of the divine Marquis realm. Most importantly, he could sense a strong beastly aura from her body. She had short black hair that reached her ears, giving her a sense of valiance. Her tight black scale armor accentuated her curvaceous figure, giving her a unique feeling. Among all the women Ling Xiao had seen, Qin Wushuang was considered the tallest. However, compared to the woman in front of him, she was still lacking. At this moment, her back was facing Ling Xiao. Therefore, he could not see her face. However, just her back was enough to make one's imagination run wild. Who are you? For some reason, Ling Xiao felt that this woman's aura was somewhat familiar. But it shouldn't be, Master. The short-haired girl slowly turned around, revealing her fair and beautiful face. Her facial features were beautiful. Especially the blood rune between her eyebrows, it added to her allure. You are Hua Hua. Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed and a trace of surprise appeared on his face. However, the black-haired girl let out a charming smile. In a flash, she jumped into Ling Xiao's arms. Master! I succeeded in transforming! Hua Hua's voice was extremely charming. However, Ling Xiao just stood there blankly. Feeling the surging sensation in his arms, he swallowed hard. But aren't you a male? Originally, Ling Xiao thought that since the demonic dragon lusted after women, Hua must be a male dragon. But why inexplicably, Ling Xiao suddenly remembered that Hua liked to stay with him. He felt a little, however, although Ling Xiao subjectively thought that Hua was a male dragon, he had never verified it. However, it seemed that this demonic dragon's hobby was quite strange. Chapter 608. Master, I'm a female. Floey looked up at Ling Xiao pitifully. There seemed to be a demonic sun floating in her dark eyes. It was indescribably evil. However, this immortal face was simply too cold, aloof, and chiseled. If it weren't for those prominent parts, it could be said that it was difficult to distinguish her gender. In fact, in Ling Xiao's opinion, if Floey disguised herself as a man, she would be able to capture the hearts of countless girls without needing to disguise herself. Her beauty was more like a wild valiance. Devouring Dao Law, first-grade divine marquis. The original body of the primordial sky demon dragon, also known as the primordial sky devouring ancestral dragon. Legend had it that the primordial ancestral dragon was the creator of the Tao and controlled the heavenly Tao. Later on, the primordial world changed and the witch race rose. The witch gods sacrificed billions of living beings and cursed them to die. However, with the strength of this demon race ancestor, how could he die so easily? Therefore, his soul, blood, spirit, armor, eyes, teeth, horns, demon core, and heart turned into 9 dragons and rose from the primordial world. The primordial sky devouring ancestral dragon was one of them. Although the demon race lost the war between the witch race and the demon race and left the stage of the new era. However, the 9 ancestral dragons were all brave. Especially the sky demon dragon. It was said that he had once swallowed 3,000 worlds and billions of living beings. His cultivation level was supreme. Of course, rumors were just rumors. Floey's strength was still low, but her devouring talent was already showing signs. Needless to say, this demonic dragon would definitely become Ling Xiao's assistant. More importantly, the ancestral dragon, primordial phoenix, and Qilin races were the totems of the demon race. Even after countless years, the influence of these 3 primordial creatures was still unparalleled. Therefore, one day, when Floey returned to the demon realm, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. There were thousands of universes. Ling Xiao believed that the demon race would definitely stand in the vast land of the upper world. Okay, I got it. But Floey, can you get off me first? Ling Xiao smiled helplessly. It seemed that the system's products were indeed excellent. At least the ancestral dragon's sacred blood and Qilin's sacred blood were worth it. Oh! Hua smiled brilliantly, revealing her snow-white teeth. Only then did she let go of Ling Xiao and stand to the side. Brother! At this moment, Ning who stood in the distance called out softly, and there was a wisp of embarrassment on her little face. Ning Ling Xiao's eyes were clear, but his heart skipped a beat. First-grade divine general, law of strength. Immemorial Donghuang's sacred body. 4,000 providence. Like I said, the more miserable the birth of these people, the higher their talent. Based on Ning Er's model, he was abandoned by his parents when he was born and lived with his mother-in-law. In the end, the granny was robbed of all her money. The 2 of them concealed their identities and suffered all sorts of ridicule and disdain. They were no different from beggars. In the end, even granny died. How old was Ning? At the age of 11 or 12, she had actually experienced the ups and downs of life. She was clearly the princess of an empire and the daughter of a country's war god, but she was living in a dilapidated thatched cottage and was struggling to get by. Therefore, from the moment Ling Xiao saw Ning he knew that this young girl would become a great person in the future. As expected, the law of strength was the immemorial Donghuang's sacred body. With such talent, even the top prodigies of the Xingzhou in the central border, no, Even the prodigies of the upper world would be far inferior. Although Hua Hua and Ning had only comprehended one law of strength, whether it was the law of devour or the law of strength, they were the best of the 3,000 laws of strength. If Ling Xiao had not combined 9 laws and created the Sky Demon World Devastator path, perhaps he would have been tempted. Ning you've broken through? Ling Xiao smiled and reached out to rub Ning little head. Now, Ling Xiao had 3 Lolas, including Feng Ling. However, who would complain about having too many Lolas? After all, their styles were different. Cute and gentle, arrogant and rude, or cold and noble, each had their own merits. Brother, I've broken through. Ning smiled sweetly, looking a little proud. Perhaps no one would have thought that this little girl before them would actually possess divine energy that could destroy the ages, right? The name of the Donghuang was well known in the 9 heavens. He was the first mighty figure to unify the demon clan in the ancient times, and his talent was divine power. He destroyed 8,000 domains with one punch, and there were no more immortals in the 9 heavens and 10 earth. Ning on the other hand, had comprehended the law of strength of this demon clan saint with the body of a human. This was somewhat strange. Could it be that Ning had other karma? Inexplicably, Ling Zhao's eyes narrowed slightly, but he more or less had some guesses in his heart. This so-called sacred body and talent could never appear out of thin air, and they would more or less be tainted by the karma of the heavenly Tao. Hua Hua was an exception, as she was a product of the system. Therefore, even if the ancestral dragon had fallen and no longer existed, she could still appear out of thin air. However, Ning was different. She was originally from this world, but she had comprehended the law of strength in the wordless heavenly book and awakened the immemorial sacred body. This was somewhat thought-provoking. This was getting more and more interesting. Primordial karma, the era of demons, devils, immortals, and Buddhas? Ning when you studied the wordless heavenly book that day, did you see anything? Ling Zhao's tone was calm, but his eyes were filled with anticipation. Although neither the ancestral dragon nor the Donghuang could compare to his identity as the Sky Demon. However, if Ning really had something to do with this demon clan saint, that 4,000 points of providence was definitely not her limit. Even Ling Tian's template might be far inferior to hers. What did you see? Ning little face froze and she thought for a while. Her 2 long ponytails looked extremely cute. Brother, I think I saw a very bright light. Very, very bright, so bright that I couldn't open my eyes. A very bright light? Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. As expected, this girl had some background that he didn't know. There seemed to be many sounds, and one of them was very loud. Bell. Yes, brother, what's wrong? Ning looked at Ling Xiao with some confusion, but the latter only smiled gently. It's all right, Ning. Since you've comprehended the law of strength, then Big Brother will help you find a suitable spiritual treasure in the next few days. Thank you, brother. Ning smiled sweetly, but Ling Xiao looked at Floey meaningfully. Floey, follow me to do some things. Yes, master. Remember, outside, call me young master. As soon as he finished speaking, Ling Xiao and Floey's figures instantly disappeared. Cold Moon's Celestial Palace. Today, the Celestial Palace no longer had the holiness of the past. Only broken walls and withered trees were left. Even the spiritual aura in the mountain showed signs of collapse. At this moment, Qin Wushuang stood with his hands behind his back in front of the palace at the top of the mountain. There was a faint trace of worry in his beautiful eyes. It had been a day. Ling Xiao and the 3 people of the sacred sect had disappeared for an entire day. Although Qin Wushuang didn't know where the 4 of them had gone, but he was inexplicably worried. Beside him, Han Qingqiu's expression was calm. Only the remaining disciples of the cold palace hung their heads and appeared incomparably lonely. The palace master was dead, and all the elders were killed. There was no longer a celestial palace in the western border. Junior Sister Han, where should we go? Many disciples gathered around Han Qingqiu, their faces somewhat pale. Let's disperse. Han Qingqiu's tone was cold, but in the ears of the disciples, there was a trace of heartlessness. You! Han Qingqiu, you have no heart. How did the palace master treat you? Don't you know? Now that the palace master is dead, and all the elders are dead, as the successor of the celestial palace, shouldn't you regroup and revitalize the celestial palace? Revitalize the celestial palace? Han Qingqiu shook her head slightly, and a white figure was reflected in her eyes. Although I have taken revenge, the sacred sect has not been eliminated. My wish is to accompany him to ascend the 9 heavens. As for the cold moon celestial palace, what does it have to do with me? Chapter 609. Just as the disciples at the top of the mountain were enraged and yelling at the top of their lungs, suddenly, 2 figures slowly walked over from the sky. Among them, the white clothes that contained immortal charm instantly made Qin Wushuang and Han Qingqiu's beautiful eyes flash with joy. Young master! Ling Xiao! What's going on? Ling Xiao's figure descended from the sky and looked at the many disciples of the cold palace before him. Behind him, Hua Hua's expression was cold and arrogant. Her eyes moved between Qin Wushuang and Han Qingqiu. However, when she felt the coldness flashing in Ling Xiao's eyes, her delicate body trembled. She snorted hatefully. Humph, now that I have transformed, I will also take all the beauties in the world. Lord Ling Xiao, you came at the right time. Now that the immortal palace has been destroyed, I hope you can help us rebuild the sect. The disciples' eyes were full of expectation. Only Ling Xiao raised the corner of his mouth with a trace of playfulness. No need to be so troublesome. I have already thought of your path. As soon as he finished speaking, before those disciples of the cold palace could react, they saw a wave of power from the sky and directly absorbed their figures into the territory. Just right, my Sky Demon Palace is still lacking a group of tools to do odd jobs. Since you don't want to leave, then stay here forever. Ling Xiao. How are you? Those 3 elders of the holy sect. Han Qingqiu rushed to Ling Xiao's side with a trace of worry on her face. Others might not know, but Han Qingqiu knew about the relationship between Ling Xiao and the holy sect. During the battle just now, she obeyed the order to hide in the mountain and did not show herself. However, at the last moment, Ling Xiao and the 3 people of the holy sect disappeared together. It still made her feel a trace of faint uneasiness. Fortunately, since you are back, I am afraid those 3 people of the holy sect are most likely dead. As for those hundreds of disciples of the cold palace, I advise you to disperse. You have already repaid your fellow disciples. Now that you have fallen into my hands, it is your good fortune and you deserve it. Not far away, Qin Wushuang's footsteps suddenly stopped. Especially the concern on Han Qingqiu's face, it made her feel an inexplicable sense of loss. In the end, those 2 days were all the fortune of her life. It's fine. Wait for me here. Now, the 9 dragons heaven imprisoning formation only needed 5 more dragon veins to reach perfection. The 7 dynasties of the western frontier were destroyed. However, the dragon vein was still there. Perhaps it would give birth to true dragon providence in the future. Since Ling Xiao planned to let Qin Wushuang control the western border, of course he would clear all obstacles for her. After collecting all the dragon veins in the world, only Great Qin would be left. As such, the Qin dynasty was the orthodox one, occupying the fate of the western border. With Han Qingqiu leading the way, it would save a lot of time. All right. Han Qingqiu gently nodded and retreated behind Ling Xiao. Wushuang, I will send you back to the court first. Ling Xiao smiled gently. At this moment, there was no trace of demonic qi being emitted from his body. Instead, there was an abundance of Taoist rhyme and a feeling of purple qi surrounding him. Yes. In the end, Qin Wushuang did not ask any more questions and walked down the mountain side by side with Ling Xiao. At this moment, there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. She knew that perhaps she would not be separated from Ling Xiao for long. Ling Xiao. With this thought, Qin Wushuang took the initiative to hold Ling Xiao's arm and pressed her entire body against his. Let's go. I will accompany you for the next few days. Ling Xiao gently patted Qin Wushuang's shoulder. Behind the two, Ning Tiance, Xiao Beifa, and the others followed from 100 miles away. When the group reached the horizon, Ling Xiao's figure suddenly appeared on the mountain peak. He coldly watched the purple qi pure Tao body disappear. Now, he did not know whether the Divine Master still had the soul tablets of the Holy Sect's elite. Therefore, he used the Tao body as bait and placed it in the trap. Once the Divine Master came, he would definitely go to the Great Qin dynasty to find Ling Xiao. At that time, his main body would be able to deal with it. If the Tao body was fine and the Divine Master did not come, it would prove that the Divine Master really did not know about the death of the Divine Envoy. In this way, Ling Xiao could come to the southern border in the name of the Holy Sun. After all, Meng Yuan was in charge of the Holy Sect. No matter how one looked at it, it was a kind of experience. According to Ling Xiao's speculation, the Divine Master did not know about the arrival of the Sky Demon. Therefore, he most likely thought that no one in the Xingzhou would dare to disrespect the Holy Sect. Meng Yuan had not returned yet. She was just training in the mortal world. Everything was flawless. However, Ling Xiao was more or less confused about Meng Yuan's identity. Since she was the Holy Son of the Holy Sect, she should have enjoyed supreme honor. But why did the Divine Master deliberately hide her identity? Even the people of the Holy Sect did not know about her background. Moreover, when Ling Xiao captured Meng Yuan just now, he realized that there was a wisp of demon aura sealed in her body. This made Ling Xiao feel that there was something fishy going on. If his sky demon power had not entered Meng Yuan's body, he would not have noticed it even with his divine soul as a seventh-stage divine emperor. Could it be that Meng Yuan was the illegitimate daughter of the Divine Master and a demon? The Divine Master of the Holy Sect taught his disciples to slay demons, but he hid the secret of her demon body from her? However, since the Divine Master handed over the power of the Holy Sect to a young girl in her early 20s, it showed that he trusted Meng Yuan very much. In this way, this girl might become an important chess piece for Ling Xiao to destroy the Holy Sect. Haha, Miss Meng Yuan, I heard that you are good at running the Holy Sect. I would like to hear more about it for the rest of my life. However, would Meng Yuan's Tao heart be completely shattered when she found out that she was a demon one day? Inexplicably, Ling Xiao suddenly thought of the Glaze ancient pagoda in his soul sea. The Divine Master, the Ancient Pagoda, Yi Fan, by Jiro, Meng Yuan, the previous successor of the Sky Demon, and Yi Qinchan. What was the relationship between these people? Master. On the peak of the mountain, Han Qingqiu looked at the young man standing with his hands behind his back. Her beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. She turned her head and looked at the horizon. She was somewhat confused. Why did Master come back? Let's go. Let's collect the treasures of the Holy Sect first. Then, we will go to the imperial capitals of the other empires. Ling Xiao turned around and walked towards the back of the mountain. Han Qingqiu did not ask any more questions. She followed closely behind him and disappeared. The Cold Moon Holy Sect was established by Yi Luoyun 1,000 years ago. Its treasures were terrifying. Compared to the Holy Sect, the Holy Sect seemed to have existed for a longer time. Therefore, when Ling Xiao followed Han Qingqiu to a secret ancient palace in the back of the mountain, even with his temperament, his face was filled with shock. There were countless spiritual treasures and elixirs placed in rows in the palace. There were even some peerless Tao artifacts and 7th-grade spiritual elixirs. Especially the golden halberd placed in the middle of the palace. Ling Xiao's eyes narrowed and the corner of his lips curled up into a smile. Just then, the runes on the halberd flowed and turned into the shape of a dragon. It roared and howled. This halberd is called the sky-piercing halberd. It is said to be made with divine metal from the upper world. It weighs tens of thousands of pounds. Even a god emperor would find it difficult to unleash its true power. This halberd has a spirit. Nobody has ever tamed it. Though it is an inherited treasure of the holy sect, nobody has ever been able to use it. Han Qingqiu looked at Ling Xiao strangely. She did not understand why her master was so happy. A treasure of the holy sect. With just one look, Ling Xiao was shocked by the power of the halberd. Good stuff. And it's perfect. Chapter 610. Young Master. Han Qingqiu looked at Ling Xiao in surprise as he walked up to the halberd and held it in his hand. In an instant, the entire ancient palace was filled with the roar of a dragon. A ray of golden light shot out and a terrifying murderous intent turned into a boundless vision. One could vaguely see the shadow of a golden dragon breaking through the sky. It descended from the sky and turned into a golden halberd that stood in the void. Around it there were thousands of rays of light and thousands of Tao patterns. The sun and moon lost their light and the universe turned upside down. Heaven and earth seemed to be floating under the halberd. Even with Ling Xiao's divine power, he felt a great pressure coming from his hand. There seemed to be a wisp of power that was struggling and showing its unwillingness to admit defeat. How dare you struggle? Ling Xiao roared angrily. Behind him, a demonic aura suddenly shot into the sky and turned into a 100-feet-tall demonic figure that intimidated the world. In his hand, the golden halberd let out a sorrowful cry. The golden dragon on it roared and finally turned into a ray of light and disappeared. In the main hall, Han Qingqiu looked at the heaven-breaking halberd in horror. The respect she had for Ling Xiao grew stronger. A treasure that even an emperor god could not tame was like a toy in the hands of her young master. Suddenly, Han Qingqiu felt a sense of inferiority. Her talent was top-notch in the entire Xingzhou. She had 3 daos and natural spiritual meridians. Her body was a 9th-grade divine pill. Her sensitivity to the spiritual aura of heaven and earth was far beyond that of a living being of flesh and blood. But in front of Ling Xiao, she still seemed so small. Even the right to stand beside him was like a gift from her young master. Qingqiu, see if there's anything you like. Take it. Ling Xiao took out his universe ring and collected all the spiritual treasures and elixirs in the hall. Beside him, Huahua's eyes flashed with greed. But under the deterrence of Ling Xiao's demonic aura, she did not dare to act rashly. Thank you, young master. Han Qingqiu bowed slightly and glanced at the treasury. In the end, she picked up one of the Tao swords and stood beside Ling Xiao. Let's go. After collecting the dragon vein of this cold moon immortal palace, it is time to go to the other empires. In the end, Ling Xiao kept all the treasures in his bag and headed towards the back of the mountain with Han Qingqiu and Floey. As long as it was an ancient sect, their dragon veins would definitely be terrifying. Especially for immortal sects like the Cold Moon Immortal Palace that had existed for thousands of years, their foundation was terrifying, and they had produced many experts. It was not only because the martial arts of this sect came from the upper realm, but more importantly, the dragon vein occupied a portion of the qi of heaven and earth. Although they were both in the western border, it was clear that the spiritual aura on this celestial mountain was much denser. If one cultivated here all year round, one's comprehension of the great Tao and the improvement of one's cultivation would be immensely beneficial. Ling Xiao stood with his hands clasped behind his back in the depths of the immortal mountain. He looked at the straight mountain peak before him with a calm gaze. At this moment, he could feel that this peak was overflowing with spiritual aura and Tao will. This should be where the dragon vein was located. Of course, with Ling Xiao's current means, it was still a little difficult to suppress the dragon vein. But with Xiong Huan here, everything was different. Buzz! An earth-shattering buzz resounded, and Xiong Huan's figure suddenly appeared in the void. At this moment, there was no trace of demonic will on his body, but his ferocious appearance still made Han Qingqiu's beautiful eyes narrow. "Capture this dragon vein into the realm," Ling Xiao said indifferently. Xiong Huan immediately bowed, then walked to the front of the mountain and punched out. Boom! The entire mountain range crumbled in an instant, and a golden dragon figure let out a long roar towards the sky. However, before it could soar into the sky, Xiong Huan's figure had already descended from the sky. Above his head, a 300-meter-tall bear figure stood between heaven and earth, and with an aura that could suppress eternity, it stepped on the dragon vein. Poochie! Golden light scattered all over the sky. Xiong Huan reached out with both hands, grabbed the dragon vein in his hands, and lifted it in front of Ling Xiao. Buzz! The power of the realm descended, and Ling Xiao and the others instantly disappeared on the spot. In the Sky Palace, Ling Xiao looked coldly at the 6 winding dragon veins above his head, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. "Ning what do you think of this halberd?" Beside him, Ning Er's little face was stunned. She saw a huge golden halberd appear out of thin air, quietly floating in the air. The Tao runes on it flickered, revealing a destructive aura. Brother Ning covered her red lips with her little hand, looking pleasantly surprised. "This is for me?" "Yes. Let's see if it suits you." This halberd was about 9 feet long, 1 foot taller than Ling Xiao. Therefore, when Ning Er's little hand held the halberd, it looked a little strange. However, the moment the two touched, a ray of golden sun scattered from the sky. Then, the golden halberd was filled with mighty divine power, and a golden dragon floated in the air. What was different from when it was in Ling Xiao's hands was that this halberd's consciousness clearly carried a hint of joy. Damn! As expected of the destined one. Someone gave you a pillow when you wanted to sleep. The problem was, this pillow just happened to be comfortable? It seems like it likes you a lot too. Ling Xiao smiled faintly, looking at Ning holding the halberd and cheering with a look of anticipation in his eyes. When Ning Er's cultivation level reached the God-Arch realm, she would use this halberd with all her strength. Who in this world would be her match? The weight of 5,000 kilograms in this girl's hand was like nothing. The power of the Dongwang sacred body was obvious. Let's go. In the end, Ling Xiao, Han Qingqiu, and Huahua's figures disappeared. At the same time, rumors spread all over the western border. The Cold Moon Celestial Palace was destroyed in a breath, and only one of the 8 dynasties was left. The primitive emperor turned into a demon and joined forces with the ocean race to slaughter living beings. In the end, he was destroyed by Lord Ling Xiao and the experts of the Great Qin Empire at the Cold Moon Celestial Mountain. That battle was said to be earth-shattering, and the Lord Ling Xiao seemed to have the help of God. He survived hundreds of battles and killed the great demon with his own strength. He was invincible. Of course, although the rumors were exaggerated, wasn't that always the case? In the end, no one mentioned the name of the Saint sect, and Ling Xiao had become the supreme existence in the hearts of the western border cultivators. Time passed slowly, and half a month passed in the blink of an eye. In this half a month, Ling Xiao and the other 2 wandered around the western border, collecting the remaining dragon veins of the 5 dynasties into their realms. On this day, the realms shook and a loud dragon roar resounded. The sky that was originally clear suddenly had tribulation lightning descending. Layers of black clouds fell from the sky, and an indescribably terrifying aura shrouded the world. In the void above, a golden array hung horizontally. There were 9 dragons roaring in unison, and the patterns of the great Tao layered endlessly, deriving endless mysteries. Under that array, a white-robed figure stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes clear. Ling Xiao could feel that the divine power contained in this array was enough to trap a high-grade god emperor. Even if the two divine envoys of the Saint sect entered the realms now, even if they were not severely injured by the primitive emperor, they would not be able to escape death. It's almost time. Ling Xiao looked at the sky, and a smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. In the past half a month, although there were undercurrents surging in the western border, there was no news of the Saint sect. Perhaps the Divine Master really did not know about the fall of the divine envoys and the disappearance of the saint. Otherwise, it would not be so calm now. Thinking about it, the Saint sect had ruled the Xingzhou for 1,000 years and suppressed the four borders. Even the Divine Master probably did not expect that the Sky Demon would descend in this world. Chapter 611. Saintess Mengyuan? Ling Zhao's figure descended from the sky and landed in the depths of the realm, in front of an ancient forest. Mengyuan's clothes were disheveled, and she was imprisoned by the demonic chains. Her expression was blank and empty. For half a month, Ling Xiao would come every day to discuss the demonic nature with her. Apart from that, there was nothing else. Mengyuan's mind had already collapsed. As long as Ling Xiao removed the demonic chains, the saintess would be able to kill herself without needing to do anything. Wei Guangjing was imprisoned day after day. For Mengyuan, this kind of torture was worse than death. More importantly, the Divine Master was now in closed-door cultivation. The shortest was 10 years, and the longest was 100 years. And given Ling Zhao's methods, what would the Xingzhou province look like in 10 years' time? Hell on earth? Would the stability of the Xingzhou be destroyed by her hands? She wanted to die, but she didn't want to bear this sin. The current Mengyuan was undoubtedly conflicted and in pain. It wasn't that she hadn't thought of a way to break free from the demonic chains in the past few days. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the demonic chains at all. It was obvious that the demonic power had far surpassed her. The 9 heavens profound body. Mengyuan suddenly felt like she was a joke. She had been in closed-door cultivation for 20 years, studying the past and present, determined to protect the world and kill all demons. Yet now, she had just been born into the world, yet she had already encountered such a calamity. She was imprisoned here and tortured day and night. This kind of humiliation made Mengyuan want to die. Saintess, have you thought it through? Hearing Ling Zhao's voice, Mengyuan instinctively felt a kind of fear. Her originally numb eyes began to reveal endless panic. Ling Xiao, don't think you can get anything out of me. Kill me if you can. Mengyuan no longer dared to ignore Ling Xiao. Because every time she did, she would be humiliated by him. Yes, it's exactly what you think. Aren't you Wei Guangjing? You see demons as your natural enemy, but now you're just an ant in my eyes, a fish on the chopping board. The higher the starting point, the more painful it would be to fall. At the end of the day, Mengyuan was only a woman in her early 20s. The prerequisite for a perfect Tao heart was to have the incomparable identity of the saintess of the sacred sect. In the entire Xingzhou, who dared to ignore the authority of the sacred sect? Only I, Ling Xiao. Where did the Divine Lord go? Why did he leave the saint to you? Ling Xiao walked to Mengyuan's side and pinched her chin with a cold expression. Even if I die, I will not help you. Ling Xiao, you'll be killed by the Divine Master sooner or later, so I advise you to restrain yourself. Mengyuan gritted her teeth. She was the saintess of the sacred sect, but her reputation was ruined by this demon. She felt a complicated sense of despair in her heart. Especially that uncontrollable joy, it made her feel even more ashamed, angry, and tormented. Restrain myself a little? Saintess Mengyuan, will the saint sect let me go if I restrain myself? Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled, the coldness in his eyes growing stronger. Since its cultivation, what's the difference between slaying demons and slaying immortals? It's just different standpoints. Saintess Mengyuan, I'm your man now, after all. As long as you submit to me, I promise to return your freedom. Let's slay immortals together. How about that? Nonsense. Demons wreak havoc in the human world, and heaven and earth will not tolerate it. Immortals are merciful and have the world as their long-cherished wish. How can you confuse them? Meng Yuan's face turned pale, and a chill rose in her heart. Slay immortals? This sky demon actually has such wild ambitions to slay immortals as his cultivation? But somehow, Meng Yuan felt that his words were not without reason. He was born as a demon and treated immortals as his enemy. To him, immortals were just training, and the path of slaying was completed. Even if he was merciful and kind, could he really be accepted by the world with his demon body? All of a sudden, Meng Yuan felt a sense of bewilderment. The so-called good, evil, and sin were just different standpoints and different statuses. For example, the demons of Beijiang never dared to step into heaven and earth. Why? Because people cultivated to slay demons and demons. But who said that demons were not dedicated to the Tao and did not commit sins? Is that so? Heaven and earth gave birth to all living things, but cultivation is robbing the power of heaven and earth. What's the difference between immortals and demons? Moreover, the saint controls heaven and earth. Why did they drive the demons away from the north and trap the Sea clan in the south? Since the saintess said immortals are merciful and equal, why can't they be treated fairly? Ling Xiao smiled faintly, and his tone was full of playfulness. Meng Yuan stood rooted to the ground and did not speak for a long time. Even if the demons surrendered, the saint did not give them equal treatment, right? I don't care. I am the saintess of the saint, and my duty is to slay all demons and demons. Ling Xiao, don't waste your energy. Either you kill me or I will wait here for the day you are killed. Saintess, you keep saying that demons and demons are demons and demons. Do you know that you also have a trace of demon blood flowing in your body? Seeing that Meng Yuan's eyes were trembling, Ling Xiao suddenly spoke. Nonsense. As expected, Meng Yuan's pretty face changed drastically, and she was faintly frightened. Do I have to lie to you? Right now, even your life is in my hands. The calmness on Ling Xiao's face made the fear in Meng Yuan's eyes even more intense. She had heard the Divine Master mention that when she was born, her body was mixed and she was on the verge of death. It was the Divine Master who sealed her vitality and divine soul with his cultivation and nourished it with his spiritual power for more than 200 years. Only then did he remove all the impurities and cast the power of her 9 heavens mystic body. Could it be that the mixed body the Divine Master mentioned was the demon bloodline in her body? But if that's the case, who am I? Saintess Meng Yuan, it doesn't matter whether you tell me or not. I think the Divine Master must be occupied with something important now. Otherwise, why didn't he come to the western border to investigate the death of the divine envoy and the disappearance of the saint? Ling Xiao's tone was calm, but he was actually testing her. With the level of Meng Yuan's divine soul, even if there was a slight fluctuation in her emotions, it would not escape Ling Xiao's senses. You don't have to waste your time. I will not believe you. Meng Yuan's delicate body trembled, but she quickly calmed down. However, this scene could not escape Ling Xiao's eyes. All right, since the saintess does not believe me, I will bring you to see the true face of the sacred sect. Immortals may not be the savior who protects the world. As for demons, they may not be as sinister as you think. After finishing his words, Ling Xiao turned and left. Meng Yuan's emotions had undergone a great change. Presumably, it wouldn't be long before her Tao heart completely collapsed. In the next period of time, Ling Xiao planned to leave this light of righteousness alone. In this way, many of the guesses in her heart would come to nothing. At that time, he only needed to give her a heavy blow to make her willing. Immortal. Demon. After Ling Xiao's figure disappeared, Meng Yuan muttered to herself with a miserable expression. Given her current situation, Ling Xiao would not make up a lie to deceive her. However, How could she be a demon? Where did the demon bloodline in her body come from? For a moment, Meng Yuan was disheartened. She suddenly regretted it. She should ask the demon what was going on. Chapter 612. In the Great Qin Imperial Palace, Ling Xiao was dressed in white and looked like an immortal. Beside him, Qin Wushuang's beautiful eyes were filled with sorrow and pity. Wushuang, I know. Don't tell me and I won't ask. I'll stay here and protect your empire. Qin Wushuang turned around and walked towards the bedroom behind her. 2 lines of tears fell from her pretty face. However, she was not a gentlewoman and probably could not stand the lingering feelings before parting. Therefore, she did not want any promises or vows. He had fulfilled his promise to the western border. However, she had never hoped for that grand wedding, because she never wanted to be his burden. Ling Zhao's path was beyond the 9 heavens. Unfortunately, she was not worthy of this peerless young master. She would be happy for nothing. Thus, she would rather be free and unrestrained. Ling Xiao shook his head with a smile and walked into the distance. Behind him, Xiao Beifa took off his armor and was dressed in black. His blood-red long hair fluttered in the wind, revealing his determination. From today onwards, there was no General Xiao in the western border. He was just a loyal servant. Ning Tiance and the others stood in front of the imperial palace and looked at the young man's figure disappearing into the horizon. After all, Ning did not want to accompany him. However, he still had unfulfilled loyalty. He would stay in the western border and protect the great Qin Empire. He would not disappoint the young master. In the southern border, in a hidden mountain, the immortal mountain here was vast and dense with spiritual fog. If not for the wisps of smoke floating in the air, people would mistake it for an immortal holy land. At this moment, in the valley, a young man dressed in hemp clothes and had a pure smile. Even though he couldn't be considered handsome, he still had some elegance to him. Especially that pair of pitch-black and spotless eyes, they revealed a quick-wittedness. The young man was about 20 years old. He was tall and slender. There seemed to be Tao intent circulating around him. "Great Master! Chuer, you're here." In the hut, a middle-aged man dressed in green smiled gently. Although he did not emit any aura, he somehow made people respect him. He was the head of the 7 devils, the Qin devil, Wenryu. "Great Master, you're looking for me?" The young man was called Qin Chu. He was the only disciple of the 6 devils and the hope to change the situation in the Xingzhou. Listen, Qin Chu. These 2 words encompassed the 2 dominant surnames in the cultivation world. If Qin Chu wasn't a heavenly fate cultivator, he wouldn't live up to his name. Book Demon Jian Yunyang stood beside Guqin Devil with his hands behind his back. His eyes were filled with reluctance and deep love. "Fourth Master." Qin Chu bowed to the Book Demon, who nodded and smiled proudly. Clearly, he was very satisfied with this little disciple of his. 3rd Grade Divine Overlord, Sacred Body of all things. At the age of 20, there were already 2 signs of flourishing. Back then, the 6 demons searched for heaven's favorites to no avail. After all, to be able to cultivate the 6 paths was extremely difficult for anyone. That day, the 6 devils disguised themselves and drank wine in a remote tribe in the southern border. They accidentally met this young disciple in front of them. At that time, he was only 2 years old and was following behind an old beggar on the street. However, for some reason, when they saw him, the 6 of them felt a sense of familiarity. Sure enough, the 6 demons brought Qin Chu to a high mountain and asked him about his origins. However, they discovered that this young man actually came from the central border. His family had declined and he had fled here. With the great devil's vision, he could easily sense the peculiarity of this young man's soul. Innate divine king realm. What kind of terrifying talent was this? Therefore, the 6 of them immediately decided to take him as their disciple and teach him diligently. Qin Chu, on the other hand, did not disappoint the 6 of them. Within 5 years, he had broken through to the Paong realm. More importantly, his understanding of arrays, alchemy, swordsmanship, and the Tao of the divine soul had left even the 6 demons in awe. When he was 10 years old, Qin Chu had already understood one of them and became a divine warrior. When he was 15 years old, he awakened the sacred body of all things, which allowed him to understand all kinds of things. If Menyuan's 9 heavens Xian body was able to deduce the flaws of Tao, then Qin Chu's sacred body was able to understand all kinds of Tao. When he was 20 years old, his divine soul had reached the 7th grade of the divine king realm. His cultivation base had reached the divine overlord realm. In just 1 year, he had reached the 3rd grade of the divine overlord realm. In the eyes of the 6 demons, Qin Chu's talent was unparalleled. Even the heaven's favorites in the central border were far inferior to this little disciple of theirs. Chu, I called you here today because I have something to tell you. The great demon's smile was gentle, giving off an amiable feeling. However, only those who were born in the same era as him knew how terrifying the Qin demon was under his gentle appearance. One Qingshao Qin could break the sound of 10,000 years. 1,000 souls dispersing song, 9 fingers reaching the netherworld. Great Master, what's the matter? Qin Chu looked confused. Although the great demon was gentle, in the past 20 years, other than urging him to cultivate, he had never spoken to him. Most of the time, the great demon liked to stand in the cottage and stare at an ancient painting on the wall. Qin Chu had once asked the master about the identity of the fairy in the painting, who knew that the great master would fly into a rage and hit him 10 times. Since then, Qin Chu had never dared to speak again. The spirit pool on the Xuanxi Holy Mountain, the sacred ground of the southern border, is about to appear. It's a once-in-a-century event. When the time comes, both the southern border humans and the ocean race will fight for it. At the mention of the ocean race, the great demon's eyes flashed coldly. Although he was a demon, he was not a cruel and bloodthirsty demon. Instead, he was a demon cultivator who pursued freedom. In the eyes of the world, demons were not tolerated. When Ruyu and the others wanted to prove their Tao with demons and tell the world that there was no good or evil between immortals and demons, who said that demons should kill? Unfortunately, before he could fulfill his wish, the divine master of the saints sect found out. What frightened Wen Ruyu even more was that the divine master he saw later was not the woman who had ruined his life with one glance. All these years, Wen Ruyu had pondered for a long time but still could not figure out the reason. Why did she suddenly disappear? Xuanxi Holy Mountain? Spirit Pool? Qin Chu more or less yearned for the outside world. Which of the 20 young men wasn't passionate and ambitious? However, with Qin Chu's temperament, he could guess the reason why his 6 masters were in seclusion. However, as long as he was careful and did not expose his master's ultimate techniques, it should be fine, right? That's right. Chu, you have cultivated in the mountain village for 20 years and have never come out. Now that the spirit pool has appeared, it is your opportunity. If you can get the opportunity to enter the spirit pool to temper yourself, your cultivation will definitely improve. When Ruyu wanted to say something but stopped. Then, she shook her head and smiled. Moreover, we have taught you all the cultivation methods in the past 20 years. Although you cultivated in the mountain village and stood aloof from worldly affairs, you have more or less lacked tempering. Yes, as the saying goes, it is better to walk 10,000 miles than to read 10,000 books. Now that the Xingzhou is in chaos, there are many demons. You are the bright moon in the sky and should compete with the stars. Chu, do well and show them your elegance. Jian Yunliang nodded and smiled, but the reluctance in his eyes could not be concealed. Chapter 6:13. But Grandmaster, 4th Master, I've never left the mountain village. How can I find the Xuanxi holy mountain? Qin Chu's eyes were filled with excitement, but then he felt a little dejected. At this moment, he was more or less nervous. This world was vast and there were many experts. According to his second master, although the human race in southern border was weak, there were still a few tribes and ancient sections. Those ancient sects and tribes all had monstrous existences. Compared to them, although Qin Chu had 6 masters, he seemed to lack a background. Of course, with Qin Chu's current vision, he naturally didn't know that his 6 masters were famous experts even in the holy state. Not to mention the ancient sects of southern border, even the immortal sects of middle border were not worth mentioning in their eyes. And this was the reason why when Ruyu wanted him to go out and train, out of protection, the 6 of them had never asked him to leave the mountain village since he was young. The advantage of doing this was that he could cut off karma and focus on the Tao. Qin Chu's current achievements were not only because of his talent, but also because of his clear state of mind. However, as a result, his control over the disputes in this world and the hearts of people seemed weaker. Training in the world was not about one's cultivation realm, but one's Tao heart. Only by experiencing hardship, deception, and even life and death could Qin Chu's Tao be considered perfect. Otherwise, even if he hid in the mountain village and cultivated to the God-Emperor realm, he would definitely not be considered an expert. The spiritual pool was said to be the source of southern border's providence. The pool water was filled with Tao runes and had the effect of tempering one's body and comprehending Tao laws. The 100-year opportunity happened to be the opportunity for Qin Chu to be born. At that time, as long as he stood out in that grand event, he would be famous in southern border. And this was the beginning of Qin Chu's immortal path. Sometimes, being the center of attention was not necessarily a bad thing. Only with fame would there be challenges. And when Ruyu believed that with Chu Er's talent and cultivation, he would soon realize that he was invincible among his peers. In this way, his invincible state of mind would be forged and he would slaughter his way to the peak of the world. The holy sect could be destroyed. Do you only know how to eat? Chu how are you going to get to know beauties and confidantes like this? Jian Yunliang snorted coldly and glared fiercely at Qin Chu. I called you out this time not only to broaden your horizons. That spirit pool only appears once every 100 years. Not only the human race, but even the prodigies of the sea race will appear to fight for it. Sea race, Qin Chu narrowed his eyes and instinctively felt a trace of disgust. The southern border was different from the other 4 borders of the Xingzhou continent. There was very little land and many seas. It was said that at the end of the endless sea in the southern border was a border that connected to the starry sky. It was considered a forbidden land for the human clan. Some people even said that a great monster of the sea tribes that had transcended this world was sleeping in the end of the endless sea. The reason why the Oceanids chose to endure was because they were waiting for the sea monster to awaken. Of course, whether the rumors were true or false was another matter. Now that the sacred church was guarding the Xingzhou province, although the Sea clan was rampant, they did not dare to openly become enemies with the human clan. At most, they would provoke them wantonly and kill them in secret. With the strength of the sea race, the sects of the southern border were indeed powerless to contend against them. Therefore, over the years, many human cultivators had died in the hands of the Sea clan. Chuer, in fact, the Sea clan is not as scary as you think. On the contrary, their hatred of the human clan is because of the suppression of the sacred church. Most of the people in this clan are simple-minded and competitive. But as long as you are stronger than them, their reverence for you is real. Jian Yunliang took a deep look at Qin Chu. The 6 demons had instilled in this young disciple the idea that demons were not necessarily evil, and the sacred church in the eyes of the world was not necessarily righteous. In order to ensure the safety of this young disciple, the 6 demons had never told him about the feud with the Divine Master. But vaguely, Qin Chu had guessed some things. Although the six masters have not asked you to go out and gain experience in the past 20 years, you must know that they are doing this for your own good. Only when you are dazzling enough can you be seen by others and make some like-minded friends. Only then will your immortal path not be lonely. Jian Yunliang smiled faintly, his tone somewhat weathered. At this moment, the book demon's eyes were somewhat different. Obviously, the time when the 7 demons roamed the Xingzhou province must have been happy and unrestrained. Humans were always like this. Some things would inadvertently become the past. So, this was why we saw a similar back view. A familiar old street had been lost for a long time. As they walked, they scattered and their appearance changed. Like-minded friends? Qin Chu's eyes were somewhat confused, but there was also a hint of anticipation. Since he was young, he had only had 6 masters by his side, and his friends were mostly the wild beasts and flowers in the mountains. Although he didn't understand the feelings of his 6 masters thoroughly, but without a doubt Qin Chu envied them. They relied on each other in life and death and shared weal and woe. Can I really meet such a soulmate? Qin Chu was somewhat expectant. My soulmate must be someone who cares about the world, has a tenacious Tao heart, and is upright and kind. Achoo! Somewhere, a white-robed figure sneezed with a trace of confusion on his face. Who is thinking of me? Alright, Chu, go say goodbye to your other masters. When Ruyu's face didn't change at all. She casually took out a black ancient bell from her pocket and threw it into Qin Chu's hand. This bell can protect the soul. Although there aren't many soul cultivators in the Xingzhou province, you still have to be careful. Unless you have no choice, don't expose your soul technique to avoid being targeted. Remember, don't embarrass me. When you go out, don't mention your sect, but you represent the 6 of us. With that, the great demon turned around and left. From beginning to end, there was no reluctance on his face. Ahem, Chu, don't blame him. Your master is like this. He has a gentle smile on his face, but his words can kill. Jian Yunliang shook his head and smiled bitterly. Qin Chu pursed his lips and looked at the ancient bell in his hand. Tears gradually filled his eyes. How could he not know the great demon's temper? Over the years, among the 6 masters, the great master was the strictest to him. But Qin Chu knew that it was because the great master had the highest hopes for him. 4th master, can I ask you a question? Qin Chu looked at the figure walking alone into the distant mountains. He looked at the black robe fluttering in the wind, revealing his loneliness. A trace of sadness suddenly surged in his eyes. You're about to go out and train. 4th master will tell you whatever you want to know. 4th master, who is the fairy in the painting? This is your great master's. 4th master, don't you need to water the vegetable garden? However, just as Jian Yunliang opened his mouth, the might of a divine soul suddenly came from the distant mountains. It almost overturned the entire cottage. This is an adult's matter. Children shouldn't blindly ask. Jian Yunliang's face paled. He took out a golden silk soft armor from his Qiankuan bag, and his tone finally carried a trace of disappointment. This Tao armor has accompanied me for 300 years. It was given to me by my master. Now, 4th master is giving it to you. When you go out, your dog life is the most important. This Tao armor can withstand an attack from a God Emperor expert and can also conceal your aura. Remember, in front of outsiders, hold back 70% of your strength. Chapter 6:14. Thank you, 4th master. Qin Chu took the Tao armor and put it on. Golden light flowed, and a Tao intent quietly spread out. Go, say goodbye to your other masters. Jian Yunliang smiled faintly, but there was a complicated look in his eyes. Yes. Jian Yunliang didn't turn to look at the ancient scroll hanging on the wall until the young man's figure was far away. On the scroll, a figure in green walked in the mountains. Snow had just fallen, and both sides of the mountain path were silvery white. The green stones were foggy, and the snow was heavy. The woman suddenly turned her head, revealing a peerlessly cold face. Her hair fluttered in the wind, making her look like a fairy. There was a trace of panic in her eyes, and a trace of boredom. The scene froze, and she stood alone in the world. "Brother, you still can't forget Miss Yi?" Jian Yunliang sighed softly, and a trace of sadness flashed in his eyes. That year, the 7 demons dominated the Xingzhou and began to make a name for themselves. The woman in the painting floated over and swore to slay the demons. At first, the 7 demons were fearless and even looked down on her. How dare a weak woman threaten to protect the common people? But it wasn't until they fought that the 7 demons realized that they were wrong, very wrong. The woman's cultivation was so high that she could freeze thousands of miles with a thought, and she could suppress the sky with a raise of her hand. Even when the 7 demons joined forces, they were defeated and fled. In the end, the great demon Wenryu fought alone, and the other 6 demons were lucky enough to escape. But just when the 6 of them thought that the great demon was dead, he fell from the sky covered in frost. That day, snow fell from the sky and covered the 5 borders. It was also that day that a trace of gentleness appeared in the great demon's eyes. Later, the 7 demons learned that the woman was from the holy sect. Slaying demons was their duty. But in the end, she changed her mind and let the 7 demons go. But, since then, the woman had disappeared from the Xingzhou. The holy sect had strict rules, and those who allowed demons to cause trouble must be severely punished. So, Xia was probably punished. To be honest, the 7 demons ended up like this because of Wenruyu's obsession. Since then, his temperament changed drastically, and he often drank and killed people. The other 6 demons knew that he wanted to attract the holy sect and that woman. In the end, the divine master was attracted. The fall of the saber demon had completely awakened Wenryu from her obsession. In the past few years, the 6 devils had been living in seclusion, seemingly living a carefree life. However, only the 5 devils knew that their big brother was suffering. He gave up drinking and hid his violin. Every day seemed peaceful, but in the dead of night, there would always be someone standing in front of the painting in a daze. He still hadn't forgotten about the woman in green, and even now, the other devils still didn't know her name. He only knew that her surname was Yi and addressed her as Miss Yi. On the other side, Qin Chu left the cottage and walked into the village to bid farewell to his other masters. "What? Chu, you want to go out and train?" A slovenly middle-aged man with a messy beard and surging sword in sight frowned slightly. The smell of alcohol shot into the sky from his body, and his eyes carried a wisp of a dazed expression. "Yes, 5th Master. Grandmaster said that good fortune has appeared in the southern border and asked me to go out and gain experience." Qin Chu bowed. "5th Grandmaster, please drink less in the future. Now that Chu is gone, there will be no one to hunt for you." Sigh. "That's good too. Young people should go out and explore." The 5 devils' name was Jian Nanshan. He was a 7th stage divine emperor and a supreme sword cultivator. In terms of realm, he might not be as strong as the great devil Wenryu, but in terms of the Tao of killing, he was the strongest among the 7 devils. "Chu, the people outside are cunning. You must be extra careful and not trust others easily." The sword devil casually threw his wine gourd into Qin Chu's hand. "The immortal wine in this gourd was made by your 6th Grandmaster. It's comparable to a divine pill. It contains 3,000 sword qi and can kill a divine emperor." "Thank you, 5th Grandmaster." Chu. Just as the two were talking, on the mountain road in the distance, 3 figures walked over one after another. There were 2 men and 1 woman. The men were short and tall, and their auras were vigorous. As for the woman, she was extremely ugly and slovenly. They were the chess devil, the giant devil, and the pill devil. 2nd Grandmaster, 6th Grandmaster, 7th Grandmaster. Qin Chu smiled bitterly and bowed to the people who came. What is Big Brother thinking? Now that the Xingzhou is in chaos, he asked Chu to go out and gain experience. No, I'll go find Big Brother now. The pill devil, Fu Hongye, was originally the successor of a supreme sect. Her alchemy skills were unparalleled, and she was a famous alchemy master in the Xingzhou. But later on, the betrayal of her Dao companion caused her character to change greatly. In a single night, Fu Hongye transformed into a pill devil and slaughtered her Dao companion's entire family. Moreover, she sliced that traitor into 1,000 pieces before using his flesh and bones to refine a pill and feed it to the third person. Since then, the pill devil became famous overnight and was reviled by the world. She was the only woman among the 7 devils. In Qin Chu's eyes, she was the 6th grandmaster who cared about him the most. Sixth sister, Big Brother must have his reasons for doing this. Don't bother him anymore. The sword devil shook his head and smiled bitterly. A swordsman pressed forward with indomitable will. The Tao he believed in was the Tao of killing. What could he achieve by hiding in a mountain village all day? A real man should travel to the ends of the world with his sword, slaying all enemies and becoming the most powerful person in the world. Only his sword heart was immune to all evil. Yes. Sixth sister, Chu is already 20 years old. It's time for me to go out and broaden my horizons. The giant devil, Zhu Dali, tried to persuade her in a muffled voice. His muscles were as stalwart as mountains. Blood and qi rippled around him like an ocean, emitting faint metallic sounds. He was a rare physical cultivator. Chu keep this array map. It might be useful at a critical moment. The chess devil, by Yishuan, took out an array map and put it in Qin Chu's arms. Then, he helped him tidy up his clothes. Okay. Since you're going out, don't embarrass your 6 grandmasters. Yes, 2nd grandmaster. With tears in his eyes, Qin Chu knelt on the ground with a thud. Chu is grateful for the care of my 6 grandmasters. Today, I'll carry out your beliefs and become famous in the world. I'll help my 6 grandmasters fulfill their great wishes as soon as possible. Clang, clang, clang. After 9 kowtows, Qin Chu's forehead turned red. Then, under the reluctant gazes of the others, he turned and walked out of the village. At the peak of the Green Mountain, the 5 devils stood with their hands behind their back. They looked at the departing figure in silence for a long time. However, at this moment, the 5 of them had a hint of sadness on their faces. They looked like loving fathers who were watching their son go on a long journey. However, their eyes were filled with deep anticipation. After this trip, Qin Chu's name would definitely spread throughout Nanjiang. This was what the 6 devils believed in. Swoosh. Suddenly, a figure flashed through the void and chased after Qin Chu. When Ruyu's eyes narrowed slightly. In the end, she did not stop him. Most of the heavenly talents had protectors behind them. The sword devil's cultivation was the strongest among the 7 devils except for him. With him following, when Ruyu could feel more at ease. Moreover, although Jian Nanshan was a sword cultivator and had an unruly personality, only when Ruyu knew that this sworn brother of hers had great ambitions and had long wanted to leave the world. When one reached the end of the Tao, there was no other way. Just now, he realized his state of mind for enlightenment. Experiencing life and death was the fastest way to grow. However, Chu could not die. Therefore, when he fell into a desperate situation and gained enlightenment in the midst of death but was powerless to reverse the situation, someone broke the Tao he had walked on and led him further. They were protectors. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.